Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was one of those perfect late summer evenings on Lake George, the kind that makes you forget about everything else. The water was like glass, reflecting the oranges and purples of the sunset in a way that felt almost too pretty to be real. My brother and I were in our old green canoe, just drifting, not really going anywhere in particular. We'd been out for a couple of hours, mostly in silence, which is how we usually are together. We don't need to talk a lot. We're brothers. It's understood. We were over near the western shore, not far from where they call it Deer Leap. It's a steep, rocky cliff face that goes straight up out of the water, all covered in pine trees. It was getting to that time of day where the light starts to go flat and the shadows get long and deep. The air was getting cooler, that damp, clean lake air that smells like pine and wet stone. I remember thinking we should probably start heading back to the public launch soon, before it got fully dark. We only had one flashlight between us, and it was a cheap one. I was just trailing my hand in the water, feeling how cold it was getting when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow from a broken branch or something. It was on the shore, right at the tree line where the forest meets the water. It was a figure, brownish, I guess. But in that light, everything had a kind of bronze tint to it. It was thin, really thin, like if a person was made of nothing but sticks and leather. That's what it looked like. It was maybe the size of a small man or a tall kid. "Hey," I said, my voice low. I didn't mean for it to come out as a whisper, but it did. My brother was in the front of the canoe, and he turned his head to look at me, then followed my gaze to the shore. He went still, absolutely still. The thing was just standing there, facing the water. It wasn't moving, it was just a shape. But then it turned its head. It didn't turn its head like a person. It was too smooth, too deliberate. There was no jerk, no shift of the shoulders. Its head just rotated on its neck, and it looked right at us, and it was grinning. That's the part that I can't get out of my head, that I see when I close my eyes, the grin. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a wide, stretched, fixed grin that looked like it was carved into its face. It was a crazed grin. Its eyes were dark pits, but I could feel the intensity of its gaze from across the water. It was looking right at us, and it was grinning like it knew a secret that was going to kill us. My breath just froze in my chest. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack one. I couldn't look away. I was pinned by that stare. Then it moved. It turned its body away from us and walked towards a big dead pine tree that was leaning out over the water. Its walk was wrong. It wasn't a human walk. It was a loping, gangly sort of shuffle, but it covered ground fast without seeming to hurry. It reached the base of the tree, and without any hesitation, it started to climb. It didn't climb like a person, or even like an animal I've ever seen. It climbed like a sloth. That's the only thing I can compare it to. Its arms and legs just wrapped around the trunk, and it moved upward in this slow, deliberate, almost lazy motion. There was no rush. It was methodical. Its limbs seemed too long, and they bent in ways that made my own joints ache just watching. It made this slow, steady progress up the dead tree, its thin, brownish body clinging to the grey bark. It got about 20 feet up and settled onto a thick, broken branch. And then it just stopped. It pulled its limbs in close, tucked its head down, and it seemed to just melt into the tree. The color of its skin or fur or whatever it was, it blended perfectly with the gray, weathered wood of the dead pine. Within seconds, it was just a lump, a weird, irregular lump on the branch. If I hadn't just watched the whole thing happen, I would have sworn it was just a knot in the wood or a strange fungal growth. The whole time, my brother and I hadn't said a word. The only sound was the water gently lapping against the side of our canoe. I realized I was gripping the sides of the canoe so hard my knuckles were white and aching. My mouth was dry as dust. "What the hell was that?" my brother finally whispered. His voice was tight, strained. "I don't know," I managed to get out. It was the truth. My mind was racing, trying to slot what I'd just seen into a category I understood. A bear? No. A person? Absolutely not. A weird deer? No way! A part of me, a stupid, curious part, was screaming that we had to get a closer look. We had to know. The terror was a cold knot in my stomach, but the curiosity was a hot, buzzing feeling in my head. "We should go," my brother said, his eyes still locked on the lump in the tree. "We should see what it is," I heard myself say. I don't know why I said it. It was the dumbest idea I've ever had. He looked back at me, his face pale in the fading light. He didn't argue. I think he felt the same horrible pull. We had to know. We couldn't just paddle away and spend the rest of our lives wondering. So we started to paddle, slowly, quietly. We didn't speak. We just dipped our paddles into the water as softly as we could, angling the canoe towards the shore, towards that dead pine tree. The lump hadn't moved. It was just a dark shape against the darker sky. The closer we got, the more details I could make out of the tree. The texture of the bark, the way the branches were skeletal and bare, and the lump. It was still just a lump. It didn't look like anything. It didn't have a shape that suggested an animal. It was just a thing. We were maybe 50 feet from the shore now. The water was shallow here, and I could see the rocky bottom. The sun was almost completely gone, just a sliver of deep red on the horizon. The world was getting dark fast, and that's when the lump moved. It wasn't a big movement. It was a subtle shift, a contraction. It was like watching a spider draw its legs in, or a flower closing up for the night. The lump seemed to fold into itself. The outlines of it, which were already vague, just dissolved. It didn't vanish, not exactly. It just became the tree. It was like it had a cloak made of bark and shadow, and it pulled it tight around itself. 1 second it was there, a discernible shape on the branch. The next second, it was gone. It had been absorbed back into the silhouette of the dead pine. I stopped paddling. My brother did too. We were just drifting, maybe 30 feet from the tree now. We were close enough to throw a rock and hit it. We stared. We stared at that branch for what felt like an hour. My eyes were straining, trying to find a line, an edge, anything that would give it away. But there was nothing. It was just a branch on a dead tree. The silence was the worst part. The forest had gone completely quiet. No crickets, no frogs, no birds. It was a dead, heavy silence that pressed in on my eardrums. The only thing I could hear was my own heartbeat thumping in my head. Then a thought popped into my head, clear and cold: wood devils. When I was a kid, my grandpa used to tell us stories about the Adirondacks. Not the nice stories for tourists, the old ones. He talked about things that lived deep in the woods, things that were there before people. He called them wood devils. He said they weren't big and hairy like in the movies. He said they were thin and fast, that they could look like a dead tree or a pile of leaves, and that they had a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. He said they liked to watch. He told us never to go into the deep woods alone, and if we ever saw something that didn't look right, to get out. Don't look back. Just get out. I'd always thought they were just stories, scary stories to keep kids from wandering off. Sitting in that canoe, staring at that empty-looking branch, I knew they weren't just stories. This thing, with its unnatural movement and that fixed, crazy grin, was exactly what he'd described. It was a wood devil, and it had been watching us. The fear that washed over me then was different from the initial shock. That was a hot, sharp fear. This was a deep, cold, soul-level terror. This was the fear of knowing that the world is not what you think it is, that the places you know and love, the lake you've been coming to since you were a baby, hold secrets, dark, ancient secrets that see you and find you amusing. "We need to go. Now," I said. My voice was shaky. My brother didn't need to be told twice. He plunged his paddle into the water and started pulling hard. I did the same. We weren't trying to be quiet anymore. We were making noise, splashing, frantically trying to turn the canoe around and get away from that shore. As we turned, my eyes were still glued to that tree, and for a single heart-stopping second, I saw it again. Not the whole thing, just the grin. It was like the shadows on the tree trunk shifted, and for a flicker of a moment, that wide, horrifying grin reappeared, hanging in the darkness, watching us flee. Then it was gone. We paddled. We paddled like our lives depended on it. We didn't look back. We just pointed the canoe towards the center of the lake and powered forward. My arms and back were burning, but I didn't care. The adrenaline was screaming through my system, telling me to go, go, go. It was fully dark by the time we got back to the public launch. We dragged the canoe out of the water, threw it onto the roof of my car, and tied it down with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. We didn't speak the whole drive home. We just sat there in the car, wrapped in that thick, suffocating silence. We never really talked about it after that, not in any real way. We'd mention it sometimes, in a roundabout way. "Remember that time on the lake?" one of us would say. And the other would just nod. And that was it. There was nothing else to say. We both knew what we saw. We both knew it was real. I still go up to Lake George. It's my favorite place in the world, but I don't go out on the water near Deer Leap at sunset anymore. I look at the dead pine trees along the shore now, all of them. I look for lumps that don't belong, for shadows that seem too dark. I never see anything. But I know that something is out there. Something that can fold itself into a tree and watch you with a crazed grin on its face. Something that moves in a way that nothing should move. And I know that on that one evening, it saw us. And for a little while, we were part of its world. A world I never want to see again. Story 2. I was out fishing that day, just like I'd done 100 times before. It was early morning, maybe around 7 or so. And the sun was still low, casting long shadows through the trees. The air had that cool, damp feel you get near the river, and everything was quiet except for the water rushing over the rocks. This spot, it's on a remote stretch of the river, deep in the forested region where I grew up. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid, and over the years, it became my go-to place when I needed to clear my head. It's not easy to get to. You have to hike about a mile through thick woods, following a barely there trail that's mostly used by deer. But once you're there, it's like your own private paradise. The river bends sharply, creating a deep pool where the big trout like to hang out, and the banks are lined with old-growth pines and ferns that soak up all the sound. I've always felt safe there, like it was my secret sanctuary. That morning, I'd packed my gear the night before, my old fishing rod, a tackle box with some lures and a small net. I didn't bring much else, just a water bottle and a sandwich because I planned to be back by noon. The hike in was uneventful. The forest was waking up, birds chirping, and I could smell the pine needles and wet earth. It felt good to be out there, alone with my thoughts. When I reached the river, I found my usual spot on a flat rock that jutted out into the water. I've sat on that rock so many times. I've worn a smooth patch on it. I set up my rod, baited the hook with a worm I'd dug up from my garden, and cast the line into the pool. The current was strong, but I knew how to work it. For the first hour or so, nothing much happened. I caught a couple of small fish, but I released them back. I was waiting for one of the big ones, the kind that put up a fight. The sun climbed higher, and the light started filtering through the trees, making the water sparkle. I remember feeling completely at peace, just watching the river flow and listening to the sounds around me. There's something about fishing that lets your mind wander. And I was thinking about work, about life, all the usual stuff. But then around 8:30 or 9, I felt a tug on the line that was different. It was strong, jerky, and I knew I'd hooked something big. My heart started pounding with that excitement you get when you're about to land a good fish. I reeled it in slowly, fighting against the pull. The rod bent almost double, and I had to brace myself on the rock to keep from slipping into the water. After what felt like forever, I managed to bring it close enough to see. It was a massive trout, easily over 2 feet long, with silvery scales that flashed in the light. I reached for my net, my hands a little shaky from the adrenaline, and scooped it out of the water. It was thrashing around, wet and cold against my skin, and I remember feeling a surge of pride. I'd been trying to catch one like that for years. That's when everything changed. As I was holding the net, just admiring the fish, I heard a sharp crack from the opposite bank. It wasn't like a branch snapping underfoot. It was louder, deeper, like something big had broken. I froze for a second, my head whipping around to look. The opposite side of the river is steep and wooded, with dense undergrowth that's hard to see through. At first, I thought it might be a deer or maybe a bear. I've seen both out here before, but then I saw a large rock, maybe the size of a football, splash into the water about 20 yards downstream. It hit with a loud plop, sending ripples across the surface. My first thought was that someone was messing with me, but that didn't make sense. This place is so remote, I've never run into another person here. I stood up, still holding the net with the trout, and squinted into the trees. That's when I saw it, a massive figure standing just at the edge of the forest. It was tall, way taller than any person I've ever seen, and covered in dark brown hair that looked almost black in the shadows. I'd guess it was over 8 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the light behind it. Its arms were long and muscular, hanging down almost to its knees, and it had this powerful build that made me think of a gorilla, but upright. But the worst part was its eyes. They were locked on me, and they didn't look animal-like in a way I could recognize. They were intelligent, focused, and filled with something I can only describe as intensity. For a moment, I just stood there, paralyzed. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like my body knew this was wrong, but my mind was stuck. The creature didn't move. It just stared. And I could feel its gaze like a physical weight. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard, I thought it might burst out. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the sound of the river seemed to fade into the background. The trout was still flopping in the net, but I barely noticed. Then it let out a sound that I'll never forget. A deep, chest-rattling scream that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. It wasn't like a bear's roar or a human yell. It was lower, more guttural, and it vibrated through me, making my bones ache. The sound echoed off the trees, and for a split second, everything went silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body, and my legs turned to jelly. I thought I was going to pass out. Before I could even think to run, the creature moved. It bent down, picked up another rock from the ground and hurled it toward me. This one was smaller, about the size of a cantaloupe, but it flew through the air with incredible force. It landed in the water just a few feet from where I was standing, splashing cold water all over my jeans and boots. The message was clear. It was warning me. I stumbled backward, almost falling off the rock, and my grip on the net tightened instinctively. The trout was still there, struggling, and I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that this thing was territorial. It didn't like me being here, and it especially didn't like that I'd caught something from its domain. My mind raced. I've read stories, heard rumors about things in the woods, but I never believed any of it. Now, faced with this, all I could think was that I needed to get out of there alive. I was trembling so badly I could barely stand, and my throat was so dry I couldn't have screamed if I tried. I looked at the creature again, and its eyes were still fixed on me, unblinking. It took a step forward, and I saw how massive it really was. Its feet were huge, leaving deep impressions in the soft ground, and its movement was smooth, almost graceful, but with a raw power that made my skin crawl. In that moment, I knew I had to do something. I didn't have a weapon, and even if I did, I doubt it would have helped. This thing was built like it could tear me apart without effort. So, acting on pure instinct, I did the only thing that made sense. I lowered the net into the water and released the trout. It swam away quickly, disappearing into the current, and I let the net hang empty in my hand. I didn't take my eyes off the creature, afraid that if I looked away, it would charge. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the creature made a low, rumbling sound, almost like a grunt of satisfaction. It wasn't as loud as the scream, but it was just as unnerving. It took a step back, then another, and melted into the trees. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone. The forest sounds slowly returned. Birds started chirping again. The wind rustled the leaves, but I couldn't move. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the spot where it had been, half expecting it to reappear. My hands were shaking so much I had to sit down on the rock. I dropped the net, and it floated away in the current, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting out of there. I started packing up my gear, fumbling with the rod and tackle box. My fingers felt numb, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure that I was being watched. The hike back was a blur. I practically ran, tripping over roots and branches, not stopping until I reached my car. My heart didn't stop racing until I was on the main road, and even then I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those eyes staring back at me. I never went back to that fishing hole. It's been years now, but I still think about it every time I'm near the woods. That encounter left me with a deep, lasting fear of being alone outdoors. I used to love hiking and camping, but now I get anxious if I'm too far from other people. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I hear that scream in my dreams, and I wake up sweating. I don't know what that thing was, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever people call it. But I know it was real, and I know it didn't want me there. To this day, I can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. All I have is the memory and the chilling certainty that something out there guards those waters, and it's not something you ever want to cross. Story 3. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for a while now. I was camping with my spouse and a couple of other people at James Pond, which is near this tiny place called Hegg in upstate New York. We'd been talking about doing a weekend trip for ages, just to unwind and get away from the city noise. The pond itself is pretty secluded, surrounded by thick woods that feel ancient, like they've been there forever. The air always smells damp and earthy, especially after the sun goes down. That day had been normal, honestly. We spent the morning setting up camp, joking around, and then went for a hike along the trails. I remember the sky was clear, and the sun felt good on my skin after being cooped up indoors for so long. My spouse and I have always loved camping, so it felt familiar and safe. We built a fire in the evening, cooked some hot dogs, and just hung out laughing and sharing stories. The others, a couple of friends from work, were in good spirits too, but they're not as into the outdoors as we are, so they called it a night pretty early. One of them mentioned they were tired from the drive, and the other just wanted to crash. So around 10 o'clock they headed to their tents, which were set up a little farther back from the water. I stayed by the fire for a bit longer, just staring into the flames and listening to the crickets. It was peaceful, you know, the kind of quiet that makes you feel small, but in a good way. The lake was calm, with the moon reflecting off the surface, and I could hear the occasional splash from fish or frogs. After a while, the fire died down to embers, and I decided it was time to turn in. I made my way over to our tent, which was pitched right at the edge of the lake, maybe 10 feet from the water. The ground was soft and damp under my boots, and I remember thinking how lucky we were to have such a spot, private and beautiful. When I unzipped the tent flap and crawled inside, my spouse was already lying down in their sleeping bag. The tent is one of those two-person ones, so it's cozy but not cramped. I was just about to say something about how nice the night was when they suddenly whispered my name, not in a casual way, but urgent, like something was wrong. Their voice was low and tight, and it immediately put me on edge. I froze halfway in, one leg still outside, and whispered back, "What is it?" They didn't answer right away. Instead, they pointed toward the side of the tent facing the lake. That's when I heard it. A loud splashing sound, like something big was wading through the water. Not the gentle plop of a fish jumping, but a heavy, deliberate movement. Then came the noise of branches being disturbed nearby, cracking and rustling, way too loud for a raccoon or even a deer. It sounded like whatever it was didn't care about being quiet, like it was pushing through the underbrush without any fear. My heart started pounding right then. I slowly pulled my leg inside and zipped the tent flap shut, my hands shaking so bad I could barely manage it. The inside of the tent was dark, except for the moonlight filtering through the fabric, casting everything in a silvery glow. We both lay there, not moving, just listening. The splashing stopped, but the rustling got closer, and I could hear heavy footsteps now. Not the light patter of an animal, but something with weight, something that sounded like it was walking on two legs. I've been camping enough to know what bears sound like. They're heavy, but they move on all fours, and their steps are more of a shuffle. This was different. It was rhythmic, like someone taking slow, deliberate steps. Then it got right up next to the tent. I could see its shadow through the fabric, blotting out the moonlight. My spouse gripped my arm, their fingers digging into my skin, and I could feel their whole body tensed up. We didn't speak. We just stared at the wall of the tent, where this dark shape was hovering. Suddenly, something pressed against the fabric, not a poke or a tap, but a slow, dragging motion. It was an elbow, I'm sure of it. The outline was clear in the moonlight, a joint, then the arm, dragging down the side of the tent like it was feeling its way along. It was so close, inches from my face, and I could see the nylon stretching inward slightly with the pressure. I've never felt fear like that in my life. It was like all the air got sucked out of the tent and I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight and my muscles locked up. I was frozen, just staring at that silhouette, knowing deep down that this wasn't an animal I recognized. Bears don't have elbows like that, and they don't move with that kind of intelligence. This thing felt curious, almost methodical, like it was studying us. The drag was slow, deliberate, and it sent chills down my spine because it was so human-like, but not human at all. I could hear its breathing too. A low, guttural sound, like a heavy sigh, but deeper, more primal. The whole thing probably lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I remember thinking, this is it, we're done, and I was mentally preparing for the tent to rip open. But then just as suddenly as it started, the pressure lifted. The shadow pulled away, and we heard those two-legged footsteps again, but this time they were running, pounding into the woods, fast and heavy, like whatever it was had decided to bolt. The sound faded quickly, swallowed up by the trees, and then there was silence. Except for the faint lapping of the lake water, for a long time neither of us moved. We just lay there listening, waiting for it to come back. My heart was still racing, and I could feel sweat cooling on my skin, making me shiver even though it wasn't cold. My spouse finally let go of my arm, and we both sat up slowly, peering out through the mesh window of the tent. Nothing. Just the moonlit woods and the dark water. We didn't say much. What was there to say? We both knew we'd seen and heard something that didn't fit into any neat explanation. The rest of the night was pure hell. I didn't sleep at all. Every little noise made me jump. The wind rustling leaves, an owl hooting in the distance, even the sound of our own breathing. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The outline of the elbow, the way it dragged, the proximity. It felt so personal, like it had been right there with us, and that's what messed with me the most. I've had close encounters with wildlife before. Once, a bear wandered through our campsite, and another time, a coyote howled nearby. But this was different. This thing felt intelligent, like it knew we were in there, and it was making a choice to investigate us. At one point, I thought about grabbing a flashlight and going outside to look around, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The fear was too raw. Instead, we just sat in the tent, backs against the wall, watching and waiting for the sun to come up. The hours dragged on, and I kept checking my phone for the time, but it felt like dawn would never arrive. When the first light finally started to filter through the trees, it was almost a relief, but the fear didn't go away. It lingered, like a stain on the whole experience. We packed up camp as soon as it was light enough to see. Our friends were confused why we were leaving so early, but we didn't explain much, just said we weren't feeling well. I didn't want to scare them or sound crazy. On the drive home, my spouse and I talked about it a little, but we both kind of agreed that it was something we might never understand. We've been camping since then, but never back to James Pond, and never in such a remote spot by the water. To this day, I have no idea what it was. I've looked up stories online, and some people talk about Bigfoot or other cryptids, but I don't know if I believe in that stuff. What I do know is that it was real, and it was terrifying. The image of that elbow dragging down the tent wall is burned into my memory, and sometimes I still wake up at night thinking about it, feeling that same chill. I guess I'm sharing this because if anyone else has had something similar happen, I'd like to know I'm not alone, but honestly, I kind of hope I am, because I wouldn't wish that fear on anyone. Story 4. I was just doing my job, cruising along, not really thinking about much beyond the next curve. My mind was on the usual stuff, watching for speeders, maybe someone who'd had too much to drink, or a deer darting out from the tree line. I'd driven this route dozens of times, knew every dip and bend, but that night felt different somehow. The mist was thicker than usual, clinging to the windshield in a fine film, and the woods on either side of the road seemed darker, more closed in. I remember my hands were resting easy on the wheel, my dash lights casting a soft glow, the hum of the engine a familiar comfort. Then I came up on the one-lane steel bridge over Little Pigeon Creek. It's an old bridge, narrow, with guardrails that are more rust than paint, and it always creaks a little when you drive over it. As I started onto the span, my headlights swept across the center of the bridge, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person, some hiker or local standing right in the middle of the road. My brain automatically went to, what's this guy doing out here in the dark? I eased off the gas, starting to slow down, and flipped on my spotlight to get a better look. That's when my stomach dropped. It wasn't a person, not even close. This thing was massive, covered head to foot in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the light. It had broad shoulders, way broader than any man I'd ever seen, and its arms hung down long past its knees. The hair wasn't uniform like an animal's coat. It was uneven, matted in places, like it had been through thick brush or mud. But the worst part was its face, or what I could see of it. Deep-set eyes that glowed with this red-orange color, like hot coals, just staring right at me. They didn't blink, didn't move, just fixed on my car with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I stopped the patrol car completely, maybe 20 feet from it, my foot hard on the brake. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I've dealt with scary situations before, domestic disputes, car chases, you name it, but this was different. This was something out of a nightmare, and it was standing right there in the beam of my spotlight, not moving an inch. I remember my hands were suddenly sweaty on the wheel, and I had to consciously tell myself to breathe. I could feel the cool air from the vents on my face, but it didn't help the chill that was spreading through my chest. For a few seconds, everything was dead quiet, except for the idle of my engine. Then the creature lifted one of its arms and slammed a hand down on the steel guardrail. The sound was deafening, a metallic clang that vibrated right through the car, like someone hitting a dumpster with a sledgehammer. I actually felt the vibration in my seat, a low hum that rattled my teeth. It did it again with the other hand, another sharp clang that echoed through the hollow. The noise wasn't just loud, it felt aggressive, like a warning. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Bigfoot? No way, that's just stories, something you hear about around campfires. But here it was, real and solid, and staring me down. Then it let out a sound I'll never forget. A deep, resonant whoop that started low and rose in pitch, echoing off the trees and the bridge. It wasn't like any animal call I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a coyote, nothing. It was too structured, too deliberate, and it seemed to hang in the misty air long after it stopped. The whoop made my skin crawl, and I could feel a knot tightening in my throat. I remember thinking, I need to call this in. But my hand felt frozen on the radio mic. What would I even say? Dispatch, I've got a big hairy thing on the bridge. They'd think I'd lost it. The creature took a step forward, then another, moving slowly but deliberately toward my car. It didn't walk like a person. It had a sort of lumbering gait, heavy and powerful, and each step made the bridge groan under its weight. As it got closer, I caught a whiff of something through the closed windows, a sour, musky odor, like wet dog and rotting leaves mixed together. It was strong enough to make my nose wrinkle, and I could taste it in the back of my throat, this foul, earthy smell that seemed to cling to the air. My grip on the wheel tightened until my knuckles were white. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, cold and clammy. Instinct took over, and I shoved the car into reverse, backing up slowly to keep some distance between us. The tires crunched on the gravel shoulder, and the creature kept coming, its eyes never leaving mine. It was maybe 15 feet away now, close enough that I could see the details in its hair. Clumps of mud, bits of twigs stuck in it, like it had been wandering through the woods for days. Its face was partly shadowed, but those glowing eyes were unmistakable, and they had this intelligence to them, not like an animal's vacant stare, but something aware, calculating. It knew I was scared, and it was playing on that. Suddenly it rushed forward, covering the distance in a few quick strides. It moved faster than anything that big should be able to move, a burst of speed that made me gasp. I slammed on the brakes, my heart leaping into my throat, and it stopped just a few feet from my front bumper. The impact of its feet hitting the bridge sent another vibration through the car, and I could see its chest rising and falling with each breath. The hair on its body shifting with the movement. Its arms hung loose, but I noticed the hands, huge, with thick fingers and dark nails that looked more like claws. One hand brushed against the hood of my car, and I heard a faint scraping sound, like metal on metal. I had my service weapon in its holster, and my right hand drifted down to rest on it. My fingers were trembling, and I had to fight the urge to draw it. What good would a gun do against something like that? If it wanted to, it could probably rip the door off its hinges. The thought made my blood run cold. I've been trained to handle dangerous situations, but this was beyond anything in the manual. This was primal fear, the kind that roots you to the spot. I could feel the weight of the gun under my hand, the cool metal of the grip. But I didn't pull it. I just sat there, frozen, watching this thing stare me down. It let out another whoop, this one louder and more piercing than the first. The sound seemed to vibrate in my chest, and I flinched, my shoulders tensing up. Then it slapped the guardrail again, hard enough that I saw the metal shudder. The clang was so sharp it made my ears ring. For a second it just stood there, its head tilted slightly, like it was listening to something. I could hear the creak rushing below, the usual night sounds, but they seemed muted, like the woods were holding their breath. The mist swirled around its legs, making it look even more unreal, but I knew it was real. I could smell it, hear it, feel the fear it was putting in me. Then As suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vaulted over the guardrail. It moved with an ease that was shocking for its size, just a fluid motion that took it over the side and down toward the creek. I heard a heavy thud as it hit the ground below, followed by the sound of branches snapping and rocks shifting. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my engine still running, my hands locked on the wheel. The spotlight was still shining on the empty bridge, and the mist was already starting to swallow up the space where it had been. The sour smell lingered in the air, and I rolled down my window a crack, hoping to clear it out. But it just seemed to get stronger for a moment before fading. My whole body was shaking, and I had to take a few deep breaths to steady myself. I finally grabbed the radio and called it in, my voice shaky. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I've got a situation on Highway 32 near the Little Pigeon Creek Bridge, requesting backup." I didn't go into details, just said I'd seen something and needed assistance. They said units were on the way, and I sat there waiting, my eyes glued to the tree line where it had disappeared. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept expecting it to come back, to step out of the woods and start toward me again. When backup arrived, 2 other troopers, I got out of the car on legs that felt like jelly. The mist was still thick, and the air was cold enough to make me shiver. We searched the area with flashlights, the beams cutting through the dark. On the guardrail we found smudges, like something greasy or muddy had been wiped across the metal. Down by the creek in the soft soil, there were partial impressions. Big, deep tracks that didn't match any animal I knew. One of the troopers, a guy named Mike, pointed at one and said, "What the hell made that?" I just shook my head. I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. We stayed out there for a while, but we didn't find anything else. No sign of the creature, no more sounds. Just the normal night noises slowly returning. I gave my report, sticking to the facts, but I could tell they were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? I drove back to the station later, my mind racing, and I couldn't sleep for days after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red-orange eyes, heard that whoop, felt the vibration of it slamming the rail. It's been years now, but I still think about that night. I've never seen anything like it since, and I hope I never do. Whatever it wasn't just some animal. It was something more, something that knew exactly how to scare the hell out of me, and it worked. To this day, I can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 5. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never written it down before, never told anyone except my wife, and even then I don't think I ever got across just how wrong it felt, how it changed the way I see the woods, the world, everything. I was a logger. Still am, I guess, though I work closer to town now. This was back, must be 8 years ago now. Early November. The air had that cold bite to it that tells you winter's not just coming, it's already sharpening its knives. I was working a patch of old-growth Douglas fir way out in the Willamette National Forest. I'm talking deep. The kind of deep where your radio sputters out and the only sound is your own truck engine, and when you shut that off, the silence is so heavy, it feels like a physical thing pressing on your ears. My usual partner, Mike, had called in sick that day, so it was just me. Just me and a few thousand acres of trees that had been standing since before my great-granddad was born. The morning had been normal. Got up before the sun. Thermos of coffee so black it was almost blue. The long drive in on gravel roads that get narrower and rougher the farther you go. I was about 2 hours into my work, just starting to fell a big one, when I felt that coffee making its way through me. You know how it is. No porta-johns out there. The woods are your bathroom. So I shut down the processor, killed the engine, and stepped out of the truck. It was one of those big logging rigs, tall off the ground, and the second my boots crunched on the gravel and frozen dirt, I felt it. It's hard to describe, but you know that feeling you get when you're in a room, and you just know someone is standing behind you. It was like that, but 100 times stronger. A cold prickle started at the base of my neck and crawled right over my scalp. The hair on my arms stood up straight. It was a bright, clear day, but suddenly the shadows between the trees looked deep and solid, like doorways. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I was being stupid, that it was just the quiet playing tricks on me. I walked around to the passenger side of the truck, putting the big hood between me and the forest, thinking maybe I just needed to get this over with and get back to work. I unzipped my fly, and that's when the feeling got so intense, it was like a weight on my chest. I couldn't ignore it. My heart was starting to hammer against my ribs, a dull, fast thumping that felt too loud for the silence. I couldn't help myself. I had to look. I turned my head slowly and looked over the hood of the truck, back towards the tree line, and that's when I saw it. About 3, maybe 4 car lengths away, right at the edge where the sunlight hit the ferns and the deep shadow of the forest began. It was standing there, just standing, watching me. My brain just stopped. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, so goddamn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be 8 feet if it was an inch. It was built like a powerlifter, but lean, all ropey muscle under a coat of thick, dark hair. Not like a bear's fur. This was different, shaggier in some places, tighter in others. It was a deep brown, almost black, and the morning sun caught the highlights on its shoulders and chest, but it was the face. I'll never forget the face. It wasn't a gorilla's face. It wasn't a man's face. It was something in between. The brow was heavy, but underneath, the eyes, they were intelligent. I know how that sounds, but it's the only word. They were a dark, deep-set color, maybe brown, but they held a light in them, a knowing. They were fixed right on me, and its face was scarred. There were pale lines cutting through the dark hair on its cheek and over one eyebrow, old wounds that had healed long ago. It made it look ancient and tough, like it had fought for every one of its years. We just stared at each other. I was frozen, my hand still holding my zipper, my body halfway through taking a piss. The urge was gone, replaced by a cold terror that felt like ice water in my veins. This wasn't fear like seeing a cougar. This was different. This was the fear of seeing something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every rule I understood about the world. Its size alone was terrifying, but it was the presence of it. It felt old, it felt powerful, it felt like it belonged there, and I was the one who was trespassing. My mind was screaming at me to move, to get back in the truck, but my body wouldn't listen. It was like those dreams where you're trying to run, but your legs are made of lead. I finally managed to fumble myself back into my pants, my hands shaking so bad I could barely work the zipper. I never took my eyes off it. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just watched me with this calm, unnerving stillness. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't huff or beat its chest or anything you see in movies. It was just there, assessing me. I started backing up, one slow, clumsy step at a time, my boots scraping on the gravel. I didn't dare turn my back on it. I felt for the door handle of my truck, my fingers slipping on the cold metal until I finally got a grip and yanked it open. I practically fell into the driver's seat, scrambling to pull the door shut. The slam of it echoed in the clearing, a ridiculously loud, final sound. I hit the lock button. Thunk. Then I reached across and locked the passenger side. Thunk. The sound was so small, so flimsy, like locking a screen door against a hurricane. My pistol was in the glove box, a .45 revolver I kept for peace of mind, though I'd never had to draw it on anything bigger than a raccoon getting into my lunchbox. I grabbed it. The cold, heavy weight of it in my hand was a comfort, but a small one. It felt like a toy against what was standing out there. And then I saw my camera on the passenger seat. An old digital Nikon. I used to take pictures of weird tree formations or wildlife for my kid. My brain, still running on some weird autopilot, screamed at me. Proof. You need proof. No one will ever believe you. I looked back out the windshield. It was still there, still watching. Its head was tilted just slightly, like a dog that hears a strange noise. The intelligence in its eyes was staggering. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was a look of pure, focused curiosity. My hands were trembling, making the whole truck cab seem to shake. I fumbled with the camera, almost dropping it. I had to use both hands to steady it, pressing it against the steering wheel to keep it still. I pointed it through the windshield. The creature centered in the viewfinder. I could see it so clearly through the lens. The way the muscles in its arms and chest were defined, even under the hair, the texture of its skin on its face around the eyes and mouth, the sheer bulk of it. I pressed the shutter button. The click-whir of the camera was obscenely loud in the silence. The flash didn't go off. It was bright enough outside. The creature didn't react, it didn't flinch or startle, it just kept looking at me. It was the most unnerving part. A deer would have bolted, a bear would have reacted. This thing just accepted it, like it understood what I was doing. We stayed like that for what felt like an hour. Me, locked in my truck, holding a gun and a camera, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. It's standing at the tree line, a silent, living statue. In reality, it was probably less than a minute. But in that minute, my whole understanding of the world got turned inside out. The woods weren't just trees and animals anymore. They were a place where things like that could just step out of the shadows and look at you. Then it moved. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was calm, deliberate. It turned its head, looking away from me, back into the deep woods it had come from. Then it turned its whole body. I remember the way its muscles shifted under that dark coat as it moved. It was so fluid, so graceful for something that massive. It took a step and then another, walking away from me. It didn't run. It didn't look back. It just walked, its long, powerful legs carrying it smoothly over the ferns and fallen logs. It moved with a purpose, like it had somewhere to be. As it reached the deeper shadows, just before it was about to disappear from view, I lifted the camera again. My hands were a little steadier now. I focused and took one more picture, a photo of its broad, muscular back, the shaggy hair, as it melted into the darkness between the trees, and then it was gone, just like that. The forest edge was empty. The feeling of being watched vanished, leaving behind a hollow, ringing silence. The normal sounds of the woods, a distant bird, the rustle of a squirrel, seemed to rush back in, but they sounded thin and fake. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. Just gripping the steering wheel, staring at the spot where it had been. The adrenaline was draining out of me, leaving me shaky and cold, sweating despite the chill. I looked down at the camera's preview screen. I cycled to the first photo. It was clear, unbelievably clear. There it was, in perfect focus. You could see every detail I'd seen with my own eyes. The scar over its eyebrow, the intense, knowing look in its eyes, the powerful set of its jaw. And in that moment, looking at the photo, a crazy thought went through my head. It was almost handsome. In a terrifying, completely non-human way. It was a face that had seen things, survived things. It was a noble face, and that made it even scarier. I never started the truck back up. I never finished my work. I just put the truck in drive and got the hell out of there. I drove faster than I should have on those logging roads. My tires kicking up gravel, the truck bouncing and jarring over ruts. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it running behind me, keeping pace with the truck, but I saw nothing. I never reported it, not to my bosses, not to the Forest Service, nobody. Why? Because of what happened to a guy I worked with a few seasons back, Carl. He'd seen something too, not as clear as what I saw, but something big and bipedal moving through the trees. He told our foreman, who laughed it off. Then he told a few guys at the bar. Word got around. They started calling him Sasquatch. It was a joke at first, but then it wasn't. The teasing got mean. They said he was unstable, that he was seeing things. He got laid off a few weeks later. Officially, it was for downsizing. But we all knew the truth. He'd broken the unwritten rule. You don't talk about the weird shit in the deep woods. I couldn't risk that. I had a family to support. So I buried it. I transferred to a different logging site a month later, one closer to the highway. I never went back to that particular patch of forest, but I never deleted those photos. I still have them, saved on an old hard drive. I look at them sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, and every time I get that same cold prickle on my neck. I saw something that day, something real, something that doesn't fit into any box we have. And the part that haunts me the most, the part I can't shake, isn't the fear. It's the look in its eyes. It was looking at me the same way I was looking at it, with a kind of stunned mutual recognition, like we were both seeing something we thought was only a story. And then it just turned around and walked away. But story 6, deceit is okay, so this is something I've never really talked about in detail, not to anyone who'd get it anyway. My wife thinks I just spooked myself in the woods, and my buddies back then just laughed it off. But I know what I saw. It's been decades, and I still get this cold, heavy feeling in my gut whenever I think about it. I need to get it out, just once, to people who might actually believe that these things can happen. It was August of 1992. I was living in a small town in Florida, not far from the Everglades. The air was thick and wet all the time, but this was different. You could feel the storm coming. Hurricane Andrew was churning out in the Atlantic, and everyone was battening down the hatches, buying up all the water and plywood from the hardware stores. The news was just a constant, low hum of dread. I'd lived through storms before, but the way people were talking, this one was supposed to be the big one. I guess I just needed to get out of the house. The tension was getting to me. My place felt small. The walls were closing in. I figured I'd go for one last hike in the swamp before everything got torn up. It was stupid. I know that now, but at the time it made a weird kind of sense. A bit of peace before the chaos. I told myself I'd just stick to the main trail, be in and out in a couple of hours. I drove my old pickup truck out to the trailhead around 10 in the morning. The sky was this weird bruised color, not gray, but a sort of sickly yellow-green. The air was completely still. No wind, not a single leaf was moving. It was so quiet it was loud, you know. Normally the swamp is a noisy place. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, birds calling. That day it was dead silent. It was like something had just turned the sound off. I started walking down the trail, my boots making soft, squelching sounds in the damp earth. The silence was the first thing that really got to me. It felt wrong. It felt like I was being rude, like I was walking into a room where everyone had just stopped talking. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just the pressure change from the hurricane. Animals are smarter than people. They probably all hunkered down already. But then I got this feeling. It's hard to describe. It was a physical sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was dragging a cold finger right down my spine. The feeling you get when you just know that you're not alone. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, but it just got stronger. My heart started beating a little faster, a dull thump, thump, thump in my chest. I remember my mouth getting dry, and I had to keep swallowing. I must have walked for another 20 minutes, and the feeling just wouldn't go away. It was like a weight on my shoulders. I finally stopped, pretending to tie my bootlace, just so I could listen. Nothing. Just the blood pounding in my ears. I stood up and, trying to be casual, I glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw it, about 50 yards back, maybe a little less, just off the trail where the trees started to get thick. It was a figure, a big one, taller and broader than any man I'd ever seen. It was standing upright on 2 legs, and it was just watching me. My brain just froze for a second. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was covered in hair, this long, shaggy, blackish-brown hair that was matted and wet in places. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its head was oval-shaped, like one of those old-fashioned water balloons, the kind you'd fill up from the tap, kind of narrow at the top and wider at the bottom. Its face was flat, with a wide, flat nose. Its eyes, they were long and skinny, like 2 dark slits. And its lower lip, I'll never forget this, it was just hanging down, loose and slack. Its arms were unbelievably long. I'm talking down past its knees, just hanging there at its sides. They were thick, powerful looking, like a gorilla's arms, but even longer in proportion to its body. It was just standing there, completely still, partly hidden by a cypress tree. I didn't move. I don't think I even breathed. We just stood there looking at each other. I wasn't thinking Bigfoot or Sasquatch or anything like that. I wasn't thinking anything at all. It was pure animal terror. My body was screaming at me to run, but my feet were glued to the spot. Then it moved. It turned and started walking away from the trail deeper into the swamp. It didn't run. It just walked with this slow, easy grace that was terrifying because it looked so effortless. It was heading towards a patch of deeper water and thick muck, the kind of place I'd sink into up to my thighs, and I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was shock, maybe some stupid primal curiosity, but I decided to follow it. Not to get closer, God no, just to keep it in sight. To prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. Moving through that swamp was a nightmare. Every step was a struggle. The mud sucked at my boots, making a thick pulling sound every time I lifted my foot. Vines grabbed at my ankles. The water was lukewarm and slimy. I was making so much noise, splashing and grunting, my clothes getting soaked and heavy. But it just glided. It moved through that same muck and water like it wasn't even there. Its long legs just stepped right through it. It was in its element. I was just a clumsy intruder. I kept my distance, maybe 100 feet back, using trees for cover as best I could. I watched it for what felt like a long time, but was probably only about 10 minutes. It would walk for a bit, then stop, and its long arm would just dip into the murky water. It would pull something out, I couldn't see what, and bring it to its mouth. I heard a soft, wet, crunching sound a couple of times. It was just foraging, eating, going about its business. That was almost the strangest part. It wasn't acting like a monster. It was just an animal. A huge, terrifying animal that shouldn't exist, but an animal nonetheless. That thought almost made me feel a little calmer. Almost. I was crouched behind a fallen log, peeking over the top, just watching it. The smell was intense now. It's a smell I still can't really describe. It was a mix of wet dog, but muskier and something else. Something rotten and earthy, like old compost and stagnant water. It was so strong it made my eyes water, and then it stopped. It had its back to me, but it just froze. It went perfectly still. My blood went cold. Slowly, so slowly it was unnatural. It spun around. It wasn't a quick turn, it was a deliberate, smooth rotation, and its head was already facing me. Those long, skinny eyes were locked right on mine. It knew I was there the whole time. It had just been tolerating me. Its mouth, that slack lower lip, opened. It opened wider than any human mouth could. I saw dark inside, and its teeth weren't sharp or fanged. They were blunt, like a person's, but bigger, and then it screamed. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a growl. It was a scream, a high, piercing, deafening sound that ripped through the silence of the swamp. It was loud, so loud it felt like a physical force hitting me in the chest. It was a sound of pure, raw power and aggression. It echoed through the trees, bouncing off the water, and in that moment, every bit of fear I'd been holding back just exploded inside me. The scream felt like it went on forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. When it stopped, the silence that rushed back in was even heavier than before. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just ran. I turned and I bolted. I crashed through the undergrowth, not caring about the direction, just wanting to get back to the trail. Thorns ripped at my arms and face. I fell once, splashing into the muddy water, scrambling back to my feet without even stopping. I could hear my own sobbing breaths, ragged and panicked. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I found the trail more by luck than anything else, and I started running down it, my legs burning, my lungs on fire. The fear was a taste of copper in my mouth. I just had to get to my truck. That's when I saw them. The trees. On my way in, this part of the trail had been clear. Now just off to the side, 3 or 4 small saplings, maybe 3 inches thick, were just gone. Not broken, not knocked over. They were ripped right out of the ground. Their root balls were exposed, huge clumps of dark, wet dirt and tangled roots clinging to them. The holes they left behind were filled with murky water. The raw, torn earth looked fresh. This hadn't happened days ago. This had just happened. Someone, or something, incredibly strong had just yanked these young trees out of the ground like I'd pull up a weed. And it had done it quietly, while I was running for my life. I stopped dead, staring at the destruction. My mind was reeling. Why? Was it a warning, a display, a message? And then I heard it again. The scream. This time, it wasn't one. It was 2, maybe 3, one right after the other. They came from my left, from deeper in the swamp. They didn't sound distant. They sounded close. 100 yards, maybe less, and they sounded different. The first one I heard was directed at me. These were intense, angry. They were answering the first one. There was more than one. That was the final straw. Whatever curiosity or shock I had left was gone, replaced by a terror so complete it was like being dipped in ice water. I ran like I have never run before or since. I didn't feel the branches whipping me. I didn't feel the burn in my legs. I just ran. I saw the break in the trees that meant the parking lot. I burst out of the woods, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. My truck was there, thank God, the only vehicle. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there for a second, just gripping the steering wheel, breathing in huge, gulping gasps. I was safe. I was in my truck. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse. I didn't even look as I backed out. I just spun the wheel and stomped on the gas, spraying gravel everywhere. I drove. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other wiping at the tears and sweat and a little bit of blood on my face. I drove until I hit the main road, and then I kept driving until I was back in my driveway. I never went back. Hurricane Andrew hit a couple of days later and tore that whole area to pieces. I heard the trail was wiped out, trees down everywhere. Part of me was relieved. There was nothing to go back to, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know what ripped those trees out of the ground. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else, something that lives in those quiet, deep places, something that doesn't want to be found. And for 10 minutes, one quiet, yellow-skied morning in August, it decided to let me know it was there. Story 7. It was a Saturday in the summer of 1956, and the heat was the thick, heavy kind that sits on your chest and makes every breath feel like work. I was living in Canapapolis then, a small place in North Carolina where everybody knew everybody, and a strange car on the road was news. That afternoon, I was at my own place, but the Browns' house was just down the lane on Glenwood Street, close enough that you could hear a raised voice if the wind was right. I remember I was trying to fix a stuck window in my kitchen, my hands gritty and sore, when I heard the first scream. It wasn't a normal yell. It was this short, sharp cry of pure terror that cut through the humid air and just stopped everything. My heart jumped into my throat. I dropped the putty knife I was holding and went to my back door, looking out toward the Browns' place. I could see them from my yard. Miss Brown and her 2 girls, Christine and Louise, were out in the side yard by the wash line. They had a big metal tub set up and they were washing clothes. It was a normal scene, the kind you'd see on any Saturday. Christine was wringing something out, Louise was pinning a sheet to the line, and Miss Brown was scrubbing at something in the tub. The baby, little John Jr., was supposed to be asleep inside the house. Then came that cry from the house. It was the baby, but it was different. It was a startled sound, cut off too quick, and right after that, there was a noise from the porch, a heavy, solid thump like a sack of grain hitting the wooden planks. All three of them turned at the same time, and they saw it. I was too far to see the details from my place, but I saw their reactions, and that was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. Louise, she just folded. Her legs went out from under her and she dropped to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. She just fainted, dead away. Christine, she let out this gasp that I could hear, this strangled no, and she started running toward the porch. I started running too. I didn't think, I just ran, my work boots pounding on the dry dirt of my yard, then across the road. My mind was screaming, trying to figure out what a bear would be doing on their porch, but I knew it wasn't a bear. The way they reacted, it wasn't an animal fear. It was something else. By the time I got close, maybe 20 seconds later, Christine was already on the porch steps, frozen. Miss Brown was kneeling by Louise, slapping her face gently, trying to wake her up, her head craned toward the porch, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. And that's when I saw it. It was standing on the porch. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen and built thick like a wrestler. It was covered in hair, this long, shaggy grey hair, maybe 6 inches long, matted and wild. It was standing on its hind legs, straight up, just like a person, and in its arms, held almost gently against its chest, was the baby. Little John Jr. was just lying there, quiet, his eyes wide open, looking at this thing that was holding him. Its arms were raised, holding the baby, and its paws. They weren't hands. They were big, with thick fingers, but they were wrong. The thing's head was massive, and I couldn't see its face clearly from my angle, just a dark patch under all that hair. The smell hit me then. It was a mix of things. Wet dog, but worse, like a swamp, and something else underneath. Something foul and old, like rotten meat. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, holding the baby, and it seemed to be looking down at Christine on the steps. Christine was just standing there, trembling all over, her hands pressed over her mouth. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The air was thick with this silent, screaming terror. Then it moved. It didn't drop the baby. It almost placed him down. It bent its great shaggy body at the waist and set the baby on the wooden porch floorboards right near the front door. The baby let out a little gurgle, completely unharmed. The creature straightened up. For a second, it looked right at me. I felt its gaze, and it was like a physical weight, a pressure in my head. Its eyes were deep set and dark, and they didn't look animal, but they sure as hell didn't look human. There was an intelligence there, a cold, ancient intelligence that made my stomach clench. Then it turned, and in 2 massive loping strides, it was off the porch. It moved so fast, a blur of grey, and it just vanished into the thick woods that started right at the edge of the Browns' property. It didn't crash through the underbrush. It was just gone, swallowed up by the trees. The silence it left behind was louder than any noise. Then everything broke loose. Miss Brown was sobbing, shaking Louise, who was starting to come around, groaning. Christine scrambled up the steps and snatched the baby up, holding him so tight and crying into his little blanket. I just stood there in their yard, my legs feeling like water, trying to process what I had just seen. I walked up to the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs. The baby was fine, just staring around with big, confused eyes. But on the floorboards, right where the creature had set him down, there was a wet patch. It was big, maybe the size of a dinner plate. It wasn't water. It was thick and slimy, and it smelled, that same foul, musky smell, but concentrated saliva. The thing had been drooling. A long, thick strand of it was still hanging from the porch railing where it must have brushed against it. I felt sick. My hands were shaking. I looked at Christine. who was rocking the baby, her face pale as a ghost. "What was that?" I asked, my voice a rough whisper. She just shook her head, her eyes wide with a terror I'd never seen in another person. "It wasn't human," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't an animal. It was something else." Miss Brown got Louise inside, and I helped Christine with the baby. We called the police. Officers Otis Chapman and Ed Leffery showed up pretty quick. They were good men, serious. We all told them what happened. Me, Christine, and a now conscious but silent, trembling Louise. They listened, they took notes, and they didn't laugh. Officer Chapman, a big, solid man, looked at the wet spot on the porch, sniffed the air, and his face got grim. He and Leffery took their shotguns and went into the woods at the edge of the property. They were gone for a good long while. We waited inside, the curtains drawn. The house felt small and dark. Every little noise from outside made us jump. Louise sat in a corner chair, just staring at the wall, not saying a word. She wouldn't even look at her mother or sister. She was somewhere else, locked inside her own head with that thing. The policeman came back empty-handed. Chapman said they hadn't found any tracks, not even a broken twig that looked out of place. It was like the thing had never been there. But the wet spot on the porch was still there, slowly drying into a sticky, smelly stain. The proof was right there. They left, telling us to lock up and call if we saw or heard anything else. They took it seriously, you could tell. They weren't treating it like some hysterical woman's story. They'd seen the fear in our eyes, smelled that smell. The rest of the afternoon dragged on. The normal sounds of a Saturday, kids playing, cars going by, seemed wrong, like we were in a different world now. We were. The sun started to go down, painting the sky orange and purple, and the shadows from the woods got longer, reaching for the house. As it got dark, the real terror began. We were all in the living room. Me, Miss Brown, Christine with the baby, and Louise, who hadn't moved or spoken for hours. We had the lights on, but they seemed weak, just making little pools of yellow in the dark room. We heard it before we saw anything. A sound from outside, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't loud, but it carried. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls of the house. Then something heavy hit the side of the clapboard wall. Thump! The whole house shook. Louise let out a little whimper and curled into a tighter ball. Christine held the baby closer. Miss Brown grabbed a fireplace poker, her knuckles white. Then it started circling the house. We could hear its footsteps. They were heavy, slow, deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't running. It was walking, taking its time. We could hear it crunching through the dry leaves at the edge of the woods, then the softer sound of its steps on the grass, then the heavy thud as it stepped onto the gravel path that went around the house. It knew we were in here. It was letting us know it was there. It stopped outside the living room window. The curtain was drawn, but the thing's shadow fell across it, huge and monstrous, blocking out the little bit of moonlight. We could see the outline of its head, the shaggy hair, and then we heard it breathing, a low, wet, rasping sound, like air being dragged through mud. It sniffed loudly, right at the window seam. I thought I was going to be sick. The smell seeped in through the cracks in the window frame, that same rotten swamp smell, stronger now. The baby started to fuss, a low, scared cry. Christine shushed him, her own body trembling so hard I could see it. The shadow moved away from the window. The footsteps started again, moving around to the back of the house. We heard the back screen door rattle in its frame, not a yank, just a testing shake, then silence. For a few minutes, there was nothing. The only sound was our own ragged breathing. We dared to hope it had gone. Then, from the porch, right outside the front door, came a sound I will never forget for as long as I live. It was a knock. 3 slow, solid, heavy knocks. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't a fist. It was something harder, heavier. It sounded like a rock hitting the wood. The door vibrated with the force. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. We just stared at the door, waiting for it to splinter inward, but it didn't. The knocking stopped. We heard its footsteps retreating off the porch, and then nothing. That's when the neighbors started showing up. Otis Chapman had obviously spread the word. Men from up and down Glenwood Street came with shotguns and lanterns, their faces set and determined. They organized a hunt, fanning out into the woods with their lights cutting through the darkness. You could hear them calling to each other, their voices tight with tension. I went out with them for a while, my own shotgun feeling useless in my hands. We searched for hours. We looked for tracks, for broken branches, for anything. We found nothing. Not a single footprint. Not a single hair caught on a thorn bush. It was as if the creature had never been on the ground. The woods were just woods. The lantern light just made the shadows deeper, more menacing. Every rustle of leaves sounded like it was right behind us. We finally gave up and came back to the house. The men stood around on the lawn, talking in low, confused voices. They believed us, but they had nothing to show for it. No proof. Just our story, and the lingering, awful smell near the porch that the night air hadn't quite carried away yet. In the weeks that followed, there were more reports from over near Concord Lake. A grey-haired figure seen moving through the trees at dusk. 2 hunting hounds were found dead, not eaten, just torn apart. Nobody talked about it much, not in town. It was the kind of thing you whispered about. Christine, she never wavered. She always said it was inhuman. Louise, she never did get right. She wouldn't go outside after dark, and she never ever spoke about that day. Miss Brown, she never let the children out of her sight again, not for a second. For me, the terror of that day never really left. It's the little things that stuck with me. The way the floorboards were still damp, the precise way Christine's hands shook when she picked up her baby, the complete and utter silence of that thing, the intelligence in its eyes when it looked at me, the 3 heavy knocks on the door that felt less like a threat and more like a message. I saw something that day in 1956 that I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and it looked right back at me. It took a baby and then gave it back, and I still don't know why. I just know the woods behind that house on Glenwood Street felt different after that, like they were watching, and they've felt that way ever since. Story 8, RT. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there, because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I'm still kind of shaky just thinking about it, and my hands are a little trembly as I type this. I live in Washington, in a pretty wooded area near a small lake that's maybe a 10-minute walk from my house. It's usually peaceful, just a quiet spot where I go to unwind, you know? That day, I was fishing with a buddy of mine. We'd been planning it for a while, just a casual thing to catch some trout and shoot the breeze. The weather was nice, overcast but not too cold, and the lake was calm. Everything felt normal, totally ordinary. We got there around mid-morning, set up our gear on the bank, and started casting lines. The water was still, with a few ducks paddling around and some herons wading in the shallows. It was so quiet you could hear the leaves rustling in the breeze. My friend and I were talking about work, maybe some dumb TV show, nothing serious. I remember feeling relaxed, the kind of calm that makes you forget about all the crap going on in the world. We'd been there for a couple of hours, caught a few small fish. Nothing big, but it was enough to keep us entertained. Then, out of nowhere, this loud splashing started from the other side of the lake. At first I thought it was a deer or something. We get them around here all the time. But this was different. It wasn't the gentle kind of movement you'd expect from an animal drinking or crossing slowly. This was heavy, like something big was charging through the water, sloshing and thrashing. I looked over, and all the birds just took off in a panic, ducks scattering, herons flapping away like they'd seen a predator. It was so sudden that it made me jump. My friend froze mid-sentence, and we both stared at the spot where the noise was coming from. The splashing stopped almost as quickly as it started, and then dead silence. I mean, complete silence. No birds, no wind, nothing. It was eerie, like the whole world had just paused. That's when the smell hit us. Oh man, that smell. I'll never forget it. It was like wet dog, but mixed with this rotten meat stench, so thick and foul it made the air feel heavy. I could taste it in the back of my throat, and it made me want to gag. My friend whispered, "What the hell is that?" But I didn't have an answer. We both knew it wasn't normal. I've been around dead animals before, and this was worse, like something had been decaying for days. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I could feel this cold sweat on my skin. We were still sitting there, rods in hand, but I knew we had to get out of there. The silence was pressing down on us, and that smell was just getting stronger. I muttered, "We should go," and my friend didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes wide. We started packing up our stuff as fast as we could, hands fumbling with the tackle box and rods. I kept glancing over my shoulder toward the shore, where the noise had come from, but I couldn't see anything through the trees. The light was fading a bit because of the clouds, casting shadows all over the place. As we turned to head back toward the path, I happened to look toward the tree line, and that's when I saw it, a big, upright figure just standing there in the shadows. It was swaying slightly, like it was balancing on two legs. I couldn't make out details because it was too dark and far away, but it was massive, way wider than a person, and tall, really tall. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears around here, and they don't stand like that for long. This thing was solid, almost like a shadow come to life. My breath caught in my throat and I pointed, but my friend was already pulling on my arm, saying, "Come on, let's go now." We didn't run, but we walked fast, almost jogging back toward my house. I kept looking back, but the figure was gone, swallowed by the trees. The whole way, neither of us said much. My friend was breathing heavily, and I could feel this knot in my stomach, tight and cold. When we got to my place, we just stood on the porch for a minute, trying to calm down. He finally said, "Did you see that?" And I nodded. We didn't talk about it after that. It was like if we didn't say it out loud, it might not be real. He left pretty quickly, and I went inside, feeling uneasy. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to go about my normal routine, made some food, watched TV. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every little noise made me jump. I kept peering out the windows toward the lake, half expecting to see that figure again. As night fell, the unease grew. I live alone, so the house felt extra quiet, and my mind kept replaying what happened. That smell, the silence, the way it stood there. It all felt wrong, like something out of a nightmare, but too real to dismiss. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would help, but I was restless. I kept tossing and turning, my ears straining for any sound from outside. Then, around 1 in the morning, I heard it, a deep roar, like nothing I've ever heard before. It wasn't a bear or a coyote. It was lower, guttural, and so loud it vibrated through the walls. It came from the direction of the lake, and it felt like it was right outside. I shot up in bed, my heart racing again. The roar lasted for what felt like forever, then stopped abruptly. A few seconds later, another one answered from far away, echoing through the woods. It was like they were communicating, and that made it even scarier. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, listening, but nothing else happened. The next morning, I felt exhausted, and the memory of that roar was stuck in my head. I thought about the time back in 2006 when I was driving home late one night and saw something tall and non-animal cross the highway in 2 jumps. It was fast, too fast for anything I know, and it left me with the same sick feeling. Now with this, it's like it's all connected and I can't explain any of it. I've asked around, and a few neighbors have heard similar things, but no one wants to talk about it much. The terror of that day and that roar, it's left me on edge, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe here again. Story 9. I was 6 years old. Late summer, the kind of evening where the air feels thick and heavy, and the light turns that weird orangey gold that makes everything look like it's glowing. I was out back, past the scraggly lawn where the grass gave way to pine needles and dirt. My dad had hung an old tire swing for me from a big oak tree near the creek. It wasn't much, just a rope and a tire, but it was my spot. I was swinging, kicking my legs, trying to go higher. The creek was babbling, a normal sound. Crickets were starting up. Then I heard a snap. Not a little twig snap, but a proper crack, like a thick branch breaking. I slowed the swing, my bare feet dragging in the dirt. I looked towards the trees, about 30 feet away. The woods were deep there, a wall of green and shadow. That's when I saw it. Between two pine trees, there was a shape. It was tall, so damn tall. The lower branches on those pines are maybe 7 feet up, and this thing was taller than them. It was just standing there, a dark, towering shape. It wasn't a bear. I'd seen bears. This was upright, on 2 legs. It had wide, massive shoulders that sloped down, and its body was covered in long, shaggy hair, a messy brown that was almost black in the shadows. The air changed. The crickets had stopped. Everything was quiet except for the creek, which suddenly seemed too loud. Then I heard it breathing. It was a deep, rhythmic sound, like a bellows pumping. Ah! Ah! I couldn't move. My hands were frozen on the rough rope of the swing. I felt cold all over, a chill that started in my stomach and spread out to my fingers and toes. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I just stared, and it just stood there, breathing, watching me. I don't know how long we were like that. It felt like forever. Then, without thinking, a scream tore out of me. It wasn't a loud movie scream. It was a tight, strangled sound, like all the air was being squeezed out of my lungs. The second I screamed, the thing moved. It didn't run. It just melted back into the trees. 1 second it was there, a solid breathing mass, and the next, the space between the pines was empty. The woods were just woods again. My mum came running out the back screen door, her face pale. "What is it? What's wrong?" she yelled, grabbing me. I was shaking, crying, pointing a trembling finger at the trees. "A monster," I choked out. "A big, dark monster." She looked, but of course, there was nothing there. She brought me inside, told me it was probably just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw. I went to bed that night clutching my blanket, staring at the window, expecting that dark face to appear at any second. That was the start. After that, things got weird. We had an old apple tree in the side yard. A week or so after I saw the thing, my mum noticed a bunch of apples were gone. Not fallen on the ground, just gone. The branches were stripped clean in one spot, way higher than a deer could reach. There were big, smudgy marks on the kitchen window one morning, like someone with muddy, greasy hands had wiped them. My dad grumbled about vandals, but we lived miles from the nearest neighbor. Who would be out here? At night, I'd lie in bed and hear things. Not the usual night sounds. I'd hear heavy, slow footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Walking a slow circle around our house, and sometimes a low humming noise. It wasn't a tune, just a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floorboards. I'd pull the covers over my head and pray for morning. My grandma, who lived with us, she was from the old country. She didn't call it Bigfoot. She called them wild men. She'd nod sagely and say, "They were here first, you don't anger them." She started leaving food out on the old tree stump at the edge of the property, a bowl of stew, some cornbread, a few apples. In the morning, the food would be gone. Sometimes the bowl would be licked clean, sitting right side up. Other times, it would be flung aside, upside down in the dirt, like whatever took, it was in a bad mood. The real terror came one night in October. I was maybe 7 by then. A full moon was out, casting long, cold shadows through my window. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap on the glass. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I was facing the window, and I so slowly opened my eyes. It was there. Its face was pressed up against the glass. The moonlight lit it up perfectly. It had deep-set eyes, sunk back under a heavy brow. They were dark, but they caught the light just enough to shine. It had a wide, flat nose, and its skin underneath all that matted dark brown hair was a dark, leathery grey. Its lips were thick. It was just looking in at me. Then it breathed out. A huge cloud of fog bloomed on the cold window pane, obscuring its face for a second. When the fog faded, it was still there, just watching. I couldn't even scream. I was trembling so hard the bed was shaking. I slid down under the covers and pulled them over my head, making myself as small as possible. I stayed like that, sweating and shaking, until the sun came up. As I got older, the encounters changed. It wasn't just watching anymore. It started leaving gifts. I'd go outside and find a dead rabbit on the back step, placed neatly, not torn apart. Once, a dead possum. It was unsettling. My grandma said it was a sign of respect, but it felt like a threat to me. During thunderstorms, it would go crazy. The wind would be howling, rain lashing the windows, and over the top of it all, you'd hear this other howl, a deep, guttural, roaring howl that seemed to shake the very walls. It was a sound of pure rage. One afternoon when I was a teenager, I was chopping wood about 100 yards from the house. I had my back to the woods, and I heard this tremendous crack behind me. I spun around. A young pine tree, about as thick as my leg, was swaying violently. It hadn't fallen. It looked like something had just slammed into it, hard. And from the deeper shadows, I heard a low growl. Not a dog's growl. This was deeper, rougher, with a wet, rasping edge to it. Then the sound of branches snapping, like something big was just walking away and didn't care what it broke. When I became an adult and inherited the house, the tests got more direct. I was clearing some brush with a chainsaw one day, the noise roaring in my ears. I shut it off to take a break, and in that sudden silence, a scream ripped through the woods. It was deafening. It wasn't a howl this time. It was a scream, high-pitched and full of fury, the kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms stand straight up. It felt like it was right behind me. I didn't even look. I just dropped the chainsaw and ran for the house, my legs feeling like jelly. It would throw rocks, not little pebbles, but fist-sized stones that would thud against the side of my tool shed. Once I heard a loud slap against the shed wall, like someone had hit it with an open palm, but with enough force to make the whole structure shudder. Now I'm in my 40s. I still live here. It's my home. We have an understanding, an uneasy truce. I still put food out on the stump like my grandma taught me. Usually it's leftover stew or some fruit, and it stays at the tree line. Most days I'll just see a shadow moving between the trunks, or I'll catch a glimpse of a huge dark shape standing perfectly still watching the house. Sometimes I'll smell it, a musky, wet dog kind of smell, but stronger, wilder. But the truce is fragile. It can turn on a dime. Just last month, I was painting the trim on the house. I must have gotten too close to the woods, or maybe it just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I heard a tearing sound from the side of the house. When I went to look, there were 4 long, deep gouges ripped into the vinyl siding from the roof down to the ground. They were spaced out like claws, and then 2 weeks ago was the last time. It was late, past midnight. I was reading in bed. Everything was quiet. Then 3 hard, deliberate knocks on my bedroom window. Bam, bam, bam. It wasn't a tap, it was a knock. Solid, heavy, like it was made of wood. The whole window rattled in the frame. I froze, my book falling to the floor. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just sat there, listening to my own heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the glass to break. After a minute, I heard the heavy, crunching footsteps walk away from the house and back into the woods. I still don't know if it's the same one I saw when I was 6. Maybe it's its kid or its grandkid. Maybe there's a whole family out there. I don't know. All I know is that I live here, and it lives here, and we share this land. But it's a tense sharing. Every time I go outside, I'm scanning the tree line. Every noise in the night makes me tense up. I'm always waiting, always vigilant, for the next time it decides to remind me that I'm not as alone as I think I am, and that the next confrontation could be the one that finally decides who this land really belongs to. I was just a kid on a swing, and now this is my life. I don't have any answers. I just have the memory of its face in the moonlight, and the sound of its knocks on my window, and the feeling that it's still out there right now watching. Story 10. Okay, so this happened back in early October, either 1979 or 1980. I always get the exact year mixed up because it was so long ago, but it's burned into my memory anyway. I was up in this remote state forest north of Grand Rapids, Michigan for archery deer season with two buddies of mine. We'd driven up in this beat-up truck of mine, and it had been raining on and off the whole way. Just this steady, miserable drizzle that made the roads slick and the air feel heavy and cold. By the time we got to our campsite, everything was soaked, and we were all pretty tired but still pumped to get out there and hunt. We set up camp in this little clearing not far from where we planned to hunt, just a basic tent and a fire pit we dug out. The first day was quiet. I mean, dead quiet. We didn't see or hear much, just the usual rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. It was kind of disappointing, but we figured the deer were just lying low because of the rain. That night, we sat around the fire, talking about nothing in particular. And I remember feeling this weird sense of peace, like the forest was just waiting for something. But I didn't think much of it then. The next morning we woke up early. The sky was still gray, and the air had that damp chill that seeps into your bones. I pulled on my hunting gear, thick pants, a wool jacket, and my boots that were still a bit muddy from the day before. We split up to cover more ground. My friends went deeper into the woods, and I headed to this spot I'd scouted out the day before. It was near a clearing with a power line right of way, cutting through the trees. You know those places, wide open under the lines, but thick with undergrowth on either side. I'd set up a simple blind there, just some branches and camo netting, so I could sit and wait without being seen. I got settled in around mid-morning. The blind was cozy enough, with a small stool I'd brought, and I had my bow resting against my leg. For the first couple of hours, nothing much happened. The forest was alive with little sounds, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant call of a crow. It was all normal, the kind of background noise you get used to when you're out in the woods. I remember feeling a bit bored, honestly, just staring at the clearing and hoping a deer would wander through. My mind started to drift, thinking about work back home, what I'd do if I actually bagged a deer, stuff like that. Then, around early afternoon, things changed. It started subtly at first. The usual sounds began to fade away, like someone was slowly turning down the volume on the forest. The squirrels stopped chattering, the birds went quiet, and even the wind seemed to die down. It got so quiet that I could hear my own breathing, and the rustle of my jacket when I shifted on the stool. That's when I felt the first prickle of unease. You spend enough time in the woods and you learn that silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it means something's wrong. I tightened my grip on my bow, my knuckles going white. My heart started beating a little faster, and I could feel this cold sweat forming on my back, even though the air was cool. I kept scanning the trees looking for any movement, but everything was still. The undergrowth was thick and dark, full of ferns and fallen logs, and the shadows between the trees seemed deeper than usual. I remember thinking maybe a predator was nearby, a bear or something, but I hadn't seen any signs of that. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. This sudden, violent eruption of noise came from the trees to my left, maybe 50 yards away. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. First, there was this sound of heavy wood breaking, not like a branch snapping, but like whole trees being shoved aside or smashed. It was loud, deep and rhythmic, like someone was taking a sledgehammer to the forest. At the same time, I heard these deep, guttural voices. They weren't human, not even close. They were whooping and yelling in this incoherent back and forth, almost like a chant, but chaotic and wild. It sounded like multiple voices all overlapping, and they had this raw, primal edge that made the hair on my arms stand up. I froze, completely froze. My body went rigid, and I couldn't move a muscle. It was like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs, and I was just stuck there listening. The sounds lasted for what felt like forever, but later I figured it was about 3 minutes. 3 minutes of pure, unadulterated terror. The whooping and yelling kept going, rising and falling in intensity, and the wood-breaking sounds mixed in, making it feel like the forest itself was being torn apart. I could feel the vibrations through the ground, a low rumble that seemed to shake the stool I was sitting on. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. At first I thought it might be other hunters messing around, but no one would be that loud or reckless. Then I considered animals, maybe a moose or something, but the voices didn't match. They were too structured, too rhythmic, even in their chaos. They sounded intelligent, but not in a way I could understand. It was like listening to a language from another world. All growls and whoops that sent chills down my spine. I remember my hands shaking so bad I had to clutch my bow to keep from dropping it. My mouth went dry, and I could taste the fear, metallic and sour. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but I was paralyzed. I kept my eyes glued to the direction of the noise, expecting to see something, anything, emerge from the trees. But all I saw was the dense undergrowth, swaying slightly as if something big was moving through it. But I couldn't see what. The sounds built to a crescendo, the whooping getting louder and more frantic, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Abruptly. 1 second, the forest was filled with this insane racket, and the next, it was dead silent again. The silence was even more unnerving than the noise had been. It felt heavy, oppressive, like the air was holding its breath. For a few seconds, I just sat there, still frozen, waiting for it to start again. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my temples. I slowly, carefully stood up from the stool, my legs feeling like jelly. I had to see what had happened. I had to know. I crept out of the blind, bow in hand, and moved toward where the sounds had come from. The undergrowth was thick and tangled, with thorny bushes and fallen branches everywhere. I had to push my way through, my boots sinking into the soft, wet ground. The whole time, I was hyper-aware of every sound I made, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustle of my clothes, and I kept expecting something to jump out at me. When I got to the spot, there was nothing. No tracks, no broken trees, no disturbances that I could see. The undergrowth was intact, just like it had been before. I searched around for a good 10 minutes, my fear slowly turning into confusion. How could something that loud and violent leave no trace? I looked for footprints, scuff marks, anything. But the ground was just damp earth and leaves, with no signs of anything big passing through. It was like the sounds had come from nowhere or everywhere and then vanished into thin air. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I've been hunting since I was a kid, and I've seen all kinds of things in the woods, but nothing like this. Nothing that left me feeling so utterly helpless and scared. I made my way back to camp, my mind reeling. The walk felt longer than usual, and every little noise made me jump. When I got there, one of my friends was already back, sitting by the fire and warming his hands. He looked up and saw the state I was in. I must have been pale as a ghost, and asked what was wrong. I told him everything, stumbling over my words as I described the sounds. I kept it simple, no embellishments, just what I heard and how it made me feel. He listened quietly, his expression serious, but when I finished, he just shook his head. He said he hadn't heard anything unusual, and he didn't have any explanation for it. He suggested it might have been the wind or some animals, but I could tell he didn't really believe it. How could wind sound like voices? How could animals break wood that loudly and leave no trace? We didn't talk much after that. The other friend came back later, and I told him too, but he just shrugged it off, saying I must have imagined it or it was a prank. But I knew what I heard. I knew it was real. That evening, as we sat around the fire, the mood was tense. The usual banter was gone, replaced by this uneasy silence. I kept glancing into the trees, half expecting to hear those sounds again. The forest felt different now, darker, more menacing. Every shadow seemed to hide something, and the normal night sounds, the owls, the crickets, felt like they were masking something else. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear those whooping voices in my head, and I'd jolt awake, my heart racing. I kept replaying it over and over, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't. It was just this bizarre, terrifying experience that defied explanation. To this day, I have no idea what it was. I've read stories about Bigfoot or other cryptids, and I've talked to other hunters who've had weird experiences in those woods, but nothing ever matched what I heard. It wasn't just noise, it was something intelligent, something aware. And the fact that it left no evidence just makes it creepier. It's like it was there for those 3 minutes, screaming at the world, and then it was gone, leaving me with this lingering fear that I've never been able to shake. Sometimes, when I'm out in the woods alone, I'll catch myself listening for those sounds again, and I'll feel that same cold dread. I never went back to that particular spot after that season. It's been decades, but it feels like yesterday. I still don't have answers, and I probably never will. Story 11. All right, I'll just get right into it. I need to write this down somewhere, because I've been carrying it around for years now, and it's like a weight on my chest. I don't expect everyone to believe me, and honestly, I don't really care if you do. I just need to get it out. So, back in May of 2018, I was 38. I'm a fisherman, have been my whole life, not commercial, just recreational. It's my peace, my escape. I live in Port Angeles, and my usual spot is the Solduck River up near Forks. It's a beautiful area, but it can get real remote, real fast. That day I'd decided to hike further upriver than I normally do. I'd heard from a buddy that there was a killer gravel bar that opened up into a deep run, perfect for steelhead. The day was cool, not cold, but that kind of Pacific Northwest cool where the air feels fresh and clean in your lungs. The sky was this solid sheet of grey, the kind of overcast that just sits there all day, but every once in a while, a little bit of sunlight would manage to filter through the canopy of these huge fir and cedar trees. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when you're miles from the nearest road. Just the sound of the river, a constant, gentle rush over the rocks. I found the spot my buddy had mentioned. It was perfect, a wide, flat gravel bar that jutted out into the river, and on the far side, the water dropped off into this deep, dark, slow-moving run. It looked like steelhead heaven. I set my gear down, my tackle box, my net, my backpack with my lunch and a couple of beers, and got my line in the water. I'd been casting for maybe an hour, just losing myself in the rhythm of it, the sweep of the rod, the whir of the reel, the plop of the lure. It's a kind of meditation. Then I got a hit, a hard, solid tug that nearly jerked the rod out of my hand. This was a big fish. I knew it instantly. My heart started pounding, but it was that good kind of pounding, the thrill of the fight. It took me a good 10 minutes to play him. He was strong, running with the current, diving deep. My arms were burning by the time I finally worked him close to the shore. I waded out into the shallow water at the edge of the gravel bar, the cold seeping through my waders, and managed to get my net under him. He was a beautiful male steelhead, just gorgeous, silvery and speckled. And he had to be pushing 15 pounds, a real trophy. I was grinning like an idiot. I carefully unhooked him and carried him back onto the dry gravel. I laid him down gently. He was still flopping a little, his gills working. I wanted a picture. I always take a quick photo before I release them, just for me. I pulled my phone out of the chest pocket of my waders, my fingers a bit clumsy from the cold and the excitement. I was kneeling there, framing the shot, when it happened. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It just hit me all at once. It was an earthy, musky smell, like wet dog, but 1,000 times stronger. And underneath that, there was this other note. It's hard to describe. It was like damp, rotten leaves, like decay, like something had died and been left in a bog. It was so thick and sudden it made my eyes water a little. I actually coughed. Then the second thing happened. The sound stopped. The river was still rushing, but everything else just went away. The birds. I hadn't even realized how many birds were chirping and chattering in the trees until they all shut up at once. The buzz of insects. Gone. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the entire forest. The silence was heavier, more oppressive than the noise had been. It was a dead, waiting silence. My head snapped up from my phone. I looked around, my heart starting to beat in a different way now. Not the good kind of pounding. This was a dull, heavy thudding in my chest. My first thought was, bear. It had to be a bear. A big, coastal brown bear. That would explain the smell, the silence. I slowly started to stand up, my eyes scanning the tree line, which was about 30 yards away from the gravel bar. That's when I heard the snapping. It wasn't a small twig. It was the sound of branches, thick ones, breaking. Not like something was stepping on them, but like something was just plowing through them. Crack, snap, crunch. It was coming from my left, from a particularly dense thicket of salmonberry and young alders. I froze, completely froze. I wasn't even kneeling anymore. I was in this half-crouch, my body tense to run, but my feet felt glued to the gravel. The bushes at the edge of the tree line shook, then they parted, and it stepped out. It wasn't a bear, it was a man. That was my brain's first stupid, desperate attempt to make sense of it. It was walking on two legs upright like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing absolutely dwarfed me. It had to be over 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered head to toe in hair. Not fur exactly, but long, shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the dim light. It was matted in places, like it had been wading through swamps. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, like a linebacker's, but thicker, more powerful. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick with muscle. I could see the definition even under all that hair. Its head was kind of conical, sloping back from a heavy brow ridge, and its eyes. I could see its eyes. They were deep set, sunk back under that brow, but they were intelligent. They weren't animal eyes. They were aware. They were a dark, deep brown, almost black, and they were fixed right on me. It just stood there at the edge of the trees looking at me. I could hear it breathing. It was a heavy, rhythmic sound, like a bellows. Who? Ah. I could see its chest moving. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do something. But I was completely paralyzed. It was like that dream where you're being chased and your legs won't work. It took a step forward, then another. Its gait was smooth, powerful. It didn't lumber. It strode. Its feet were huge, and I could see them clearly as it stepped onto the gravel bar. They were bare, and they looked almost human, but wider, splayed out. It was closing the distance between us. 20 yards, 15. I thought it was coming for me. I honestly thought my life was over. I remember a hot, sharp feeling in my bladder, and I was terrified I was going to piss myself right there. My mouth was so dry I couldn't have swallowed if I tried, but it wasn't looking at me anymore. Its eyes had dropped to the ground, to the steelhead. The fish was still there, lying on the gravel, its tail giving a weak, final flap. The creature stopped about 10 feet away from me. The smell was overwhelming now, that mix of wet fur and deep wet earth and something rotten. It was so strong, it was a physical presence in the air. I could taste it in the back of my throat. It leaned forward, its movements fluid and unnervingly graceful for something so massive. It didn't even hesitate. One of its huge hands, fingers thick and long, reached down and just scooped up the steelhead. It lifted the fish like it was nothing. The fish was 15 pounds and it looked like a sardine in its hand. It held the fish up to its face. I saw its mouth, a lipless gash, open. Then it crushed the fish. It didn't bite it. It just squeezed its hand into a fist. There was a wet, crunching, popping sound. I saw silvery scales and a puff of red mist. The sound was sickening. It was the sound of bones and flesh being pulverized. It shoved the entire mangled mess into its mouth. I saw its jaw working. I heard the wet chewing sounds. It ate the whole thing, the head, the guts, the tail, everything, in 3 or 4 bites. Blood and clear, slimy fish juice dripped down its chin and onto the matted hair of its chest. I was still frozen. My brain had just stopped. I was just a pair of eyes watching this impossible thing happen. It finished eating. It lowered its hand. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it wiped its bloody palm and fingers on the hair of its thigh, leaving a dark, wet, red smear. And then it looked at me again, its eyes locked with mine. There was no anger there, no curiosity even. It was just a look. An acknowledgement. It was the look you might give a fence post you were walking past. It saw me. It registered that I was there, and I was utterly, completely irrelevant. It turned its head, looked back towards the forest, and then it just walked away. It didn't run. It didn't hurry. It just strode back across the gravel bar, its heavy footsteps crunching, and disappeared into the same thicket it had come from. I heard the branches snapping and cracking again as it moved off, the sounds getting fainter and fainter. And then they stopped. A moment later, the birds started chirping again, just like that, as if someone had flipped a switch. The spell was broken. My legs gave out and I collapsed onto the gravel, my knees hitting the stones hard. I didn't even feel the pain. I was trembling, shaking so violently my teeth were chattering. I scrambled backwards, crab-like, until my back hit the cold water of the river. I just sat there in the shallows, the water soaking through my waders, my whole body racked with shivers I couldn't control. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been 2 minutes or 20. Eventually, the cold from the river seeped through the shock. I had to get out of there. I stumbled to my feet, my legs feeling like rubber. I didn't even think about my gear. I left my rod, my tackle box, my net, my backpack with my wallet and keys and phone, everything right there on the gravel bar. I just turned and started half running, half stumbling down the riverbank, following the trail I'd come in on. I was sobbing. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Great, heaving, ragged sobs of pure, undiluted terror. I fell a couple of times, scraping my hands on rocks and roots, but I just got right back up and kept going. I didn't look back. I was too scared that I would see it standing there watching me go. I made it back to my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the door. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I drove straight to my friend Mark's house. He lives closer to Forks. I must have looked like hell because he opened the door and his face just fell. I couldn't even form a coherent sentence at first. I was just babbling. The river, a thing. It took my fish. He sat me down, got me a glass of water, and made me tell him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He's a hunter, an outdoorsman. He knows these woods. He didn't call me crazy, he just looked at me, and I saw in his eyes that he believed me. "We have to go back," he said. "You left your wallet, your phone." The thought of going back there made me feel physically ill, but he was right. We took his truck. He brought his rifle. The whole drive back, I was silent, just staring out the window, my stomach in a tight knot. We got to the trailhead and hiked back in. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long, deep shadows through the trees. It felt different, menacing. Every shadow looked like it was moving. We reached the gravel bar. My gear was all still there, exactly as I'd left it. My rod was lying on the stones. My backpack was open. My phone was on the ground, right where I'd dropped it. We walked over to where it had happened. The steelhead was gone, of course, but there on the gravel were the scuff marks, not footprints really. The gravel was too chunky for a clear print, but there was a disturbed area, a place where the stones had been pressed down and scraped aside by something very heavy. And leading from that spot back to the tree line, there were broken branches. Not just stepped-on ones. These were green branches, as thick as my thumb, snapped clean in half, about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. We didn't say much. Mark just looked at the broken branches, then at the scuff marks, then at me. He nodded once, that was all. We gathered my stuff as fast as we could and got the hell out of there. I never went back to that spot. I still fish the sawduck, but I stick to the more popular, easier to access areas. I never go alone anymore either. It's been years. I still think about it almost every day. Not the fear so much, though, that's still there, a cold little stone in my gut. It's the look it gave me, that utter, complete indifference. It wasn't a monster from a movie. It wasn't roaring or beating its chest. It was just an animal, a part of the woods that I wasn't supposed to see. It was so much more real because of that. It was just going about its business, and I was in the way for a moment. I got my fish back, in a way. My phone had taken a picture when I dropped it. It's a blurry, crazy shot, angled up from the ground. You can see the grey sky, the top of the trees, and a dark, massive, hairy shape standing over a splash of silver on the gravel. It's not proof of anything to anyone else, but I know what it is. Sometimes when I'm out in the woods and everything goes quiet, that smell comes back to me, and I just freeze all over again. Story 12. It was late July, the kind of thick, heavy heat that makes the air feel like a wet blanket. My son and I had decided, kind of on a whim, to get out of Arkansas for a few days. He'd just finished his finals, and I had some time off from the shop. We'd talked about going camping in Colorado for years, just never got around to it. So we packed up my old Ford pickup, threw our gear in the back, and headed out after I got off work, aiming for the Blue Lakes area. The drive was long. You know how it is on those night drives. Everything just turns into a tunnel of your headlights and the hum of the tires. We'd been driving for hours through Oklahoma and into Colorado, and by the time we were getting close, it was the dead of night. Must have been around 2 in the morning. The plan was to find a spot to pull over and catch a few hours of sleep in the truck before heading down to the lakes at first light. We passed a couple of those private campgrounds, the ones with the big signs out front. One of them had a sign that was just covered in writing, all anti-government stuff, things about sovereign citizens and trespassers will be shot. I remember my son, he's 17, he just looked at me and shook his head. Yeah, let's not stop there, Dad. No kidding. So we kept going, looking for a National Forest Service road, somewhere we could just disappear into for the night without bothering anyone or getting bothered. The road we were on was one of those long, straight stretches you get up in the mountains sometimes, cutting through a valley, tall pines on both sides, so dark they just looked like a solid black wall. The moon was out, but it was behind some clouds, so the light was this weird, silvery grey that didn't really illuminate much, just made the shadows deeper. I was just staring ahead, focusing on the yellow line, trying to fight off the tiredness, when I saw it. Off to the right side of the road, maybe 100 yards into the trees, there was an orange light. It wasn't a campfire, it was just a single, bright orange point, like someone was holding a giant ember. It didn't flicker. It was just there, suspended in the blackness between the tree trunks. I must have slowed down a little, squinting, trying to make sense of it, and as I watched, it just faded. Not like someone turned it off, but like it dissolved into the dark. It was there 1 second, and then it was just gone. I remember feeling a little prickling on the back of my neck. "You see that?" I asked my son. He was leaned against the window, half asleep. "See what? That light? In the trees, it was orange." He sat up a little, rubbing his eyes. "No, I missed it. Probably a guy with a flashlight or something." I nodded, trying to believe that. Sure, a guy with a flashlight, a weird orange flashlight. I pushed down the unease and kept driving. We hadn't gone more than another 30 seconds down the road when my son suddenly sat bolt upright. "Dad, stop." His voice was low, but it had this tight, urgent quality that made my foot instinctively lift off the gas. What is it?" "Back there, behind that big rock." I looked in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was darkness. I brought the truck to a slow crawl, my heart starting to thump a little harder. "What did you see?" Just look." I put the truck in reverse and slowly backed up, the tires crunching softly on the gravel shoulder. My headlights swept back across the road, illuminating the ditch and the tree line, and then I saw the rock he was talking about. It was a huge, grey boulder, about the size of a small car, maybe 50 feet off the road, right at the edge where the forest began. And behind it, there was a figure. My brain didn't want to process it at first. It was tall, so damn tall. It was standing upright, mostly hidden behind the rock, but its upper body and head were clearly visible. It was just there, still. The way it was positioned, it was like it had been walking and had just ducked behind the rock to hide from our headlights. It was covered in dark hair or fur. It wasn't shaggy like a bear. It looked almost like a thick, dark shadow given solid form. But the head is what I can't forget. It turned its head to look at us. The movement was smooth, not jerky like an animal, but deliberate. It turned its head and looked right at the truck, right at me, and its eyes. They weren't reflecting the headlights. They weren't two little points of light like you see with a deer or a raccoon. They were glowing, a bright, solid, fiery orange. The exact same color as the light I'd seen in the trees a minute before. They didn't shine, they were just two perfectly round, burning orange orbs set deep in that dark face. There was no white, no pupil, just that unblinking, luminous orange. I felt all the air leave my lungs. It was like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a bear, this wasn't a man in a suit. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist. My son made a small, choked sound next to me. "Dad." I didn't think. I didn't reason. Every instinct in my body was screaming one word. "Go." I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The truck's engine roared and we shot forward, the tires spitting gravel behind us. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My hands were clamped on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out all over my body. We drove in total silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two. The road curved, and the spot with the rock disappeared from the rear view. I didn't slow down. I kept my speed up, my eyes glued to the road ahead, expecting at any moment to see those orange eyes appear in front of us. "Did you see its eyes?" my son finally whispered. His voice was trembling. "Yeah," I managed to get out. My own voice was rough. "I saw them." What was it? I don't know, and I didn't. My mind was racing, flipping through possibilities. A bear? No. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have glowing eyes that don't reflect light. They don't turn their heads with that kind of awareness. A person? No one is that tall, and no one has eyes like that. It was impossible, but we had both seen it. After a few more miles, my panic started to recede, replaced by a shaky, cold fear. We needed to stop. We couldn't just drive all night. We found a wide pullout, a place where loggers must have turned around. It was still deep in the national forest, but it felt more open, less claustrophobic than that straight stretch of road. I pulled in, turned the truck around so it was facing the road, and killed the engine. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It was the quietest night I have ever experienced. We just sat there, listening to the truck's engine tick as it cooled down. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. "We have to go back," I said after a while. My son looked at me like I was insane. "What? No. Why? We have to know." I wasn't being brave. I was being compelled. The image of that thing was burned into my brain. I needed some kind of proof, some kind of measurement, something to anchor it in reality, or I was going to lose my mind. "We're not getting out of the truck. We're just going to look. We have the spotlight." He didn't want to. I could see the fear in his eyes, a reflection of my own. But he just nodded, his jaw tight. I waited until the first hint of gray was touching the eastern sky. It felt safer with the night receding. I started the truck and drove back the way we came, slowly this time. My whole body was tense, every nerve ending on fire. As we approached the area, I slowed to a crawl. There was the rock, looking perfectly ordinary in the dim pre-dawn light, nothing behind it. The forest was just a forest again. I pulled over onto the shoulder, right about where we'd been when we saw it. I didn't turn the engine off. I just sat there, staring at the rock, the spot where it had been standing. My son was staring too, not saying a word. "Get the tape measure from the toolbox," I said, my voice low. He looked at me, confused. But he climbed out, unlocked the toolbox in the bed, and brought back the long, yellow 25-foot tape measure. "I'm going to walk to the rock," I told him. "You stay here. Hold one end of the tape at the front of the truck. If you see anything, you honk the horn. You understand? Just one long blast." He nodded, his face pale. I took the other end of the tape and started walking. The gravel crunched under my boots, and the sound was incredibly loud in the silence. My skin was crawling. I felt like those orange eyes were on me, watching from the trees. I kept my own eyes scanning the forest line, my head on a swivel. Every shadow looked like a moving shape. Every rustle of a leaf, though there was no wind, made me jump. I reached the rock. It was coarse and cold to the touch. I looked at the ground behind it. The dirt and pine needles were scuffed up, disturbed. There were no clear footprints, nothing you could take a cast of. It was just a mess, like something heavy had been shifting its weight back there. I looked up at the top of the rock. That's where its head had been. I walked back to the truck, reeling in the tape measure as I went. My son was still holding his end, his knuckles white. "Okay," I said, my breath making little clouds in the cold morning air. "I'm 67 inches tall. The top of that rock was level with its eyes. Let's see how high that is." I had him hold the end of the tape at the base of the rock. I walked back to the truck and stretched the tape out. The distance from the rock to the front of our truck where we'd been sitting was 48 feet. Then I did the math. I'm not a math whiz, but this was simple geometry. Using the known height of my eyes from the ground, the distance to the rock, and estimating the angle. I did the calculation 3 times on a notepad, my hands shaking. The thing's eyes had been 7.5 feet off the ground. 7.5 feet. That meant the thing itself was probably over 8 feet tall, maybe closer to 8.5. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a shadow. It was a massive bipedal creature that stood over 8 feet tall and had glowing orange eyes. We just stood there for a minute, looking at the number I'd written down. There was nothing else to say. The proof was right there in my shaky handwriting. We had seen something that shouldn't exist, and we had the measurements to prove its impossible size. We packed up the tape measure and got back in the truck. We didn't go camping, we just started driving home. We didn't talk much for the first few hours. What was there to say? We both knew what we saw. The sun came up, a beautiful Colorado morning, but it felt hollow. The world looked the same, but it wasn't. It was a world where that thing lived. A world where you could be driving down a lonely road in the middle of the night and see a pair of orange eyes watching you from the darkness. Eyes that held intelligence I can't even describe. We never told anyone. Who would believe us? They'd say it was a bear, or the lack of sleep, or a prank. But we know. I know. I close my eyes at night, and I can still see it, clear as day, standing behind that rock, turning its head, those two burning orange coals fixing on me. It saw us. It knew we were there, and I have no idea what it was or what it wanted. I just know that we were seen by something that shouldn't be, and that feeling, the feeling of being watched by something so completely outside of anything I've ever known, has never left me. It's been weeks now, and I still can't sleep with the window open. I still jump at noises in the night. I saw something in the woods that late July morning, and I don't think I'll ever feel safe in the dark again. Story 13. It was the last day of 1976, December 31st, a Thursday. I remember that because I was thinking about New Year's Eve, about whether I'd bother staying up to watch the ball drop on TV. It was cold, the kind of damp cold that gets right into your bones, the kind we get here in North Carolina when the wind comes off the swamp. The sky was that flat, grey color it gets in the late afternoon in winter, like the whole world was holding its breath. I was in Mill Swamp. I'd been out there since just after lunch, not really hunting, just walking. I had my old .22 with me, more out of habit than anything else. Maybe I'd get a squirrel if I saw one. Mostly, I was just walking, enjoying the quiet, or what was supposed to be quiet. The swamp is never really silent. There's always the drip of water from the cypress knees, the rustle of something in the leaves, the distant call of a bird. You get used to the sounds. They become a kind of white noise. I was following a game trail I knew pretty well, one that cuts through a thick stand of loblolly pines. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. I remember my boots sinking a little into the soft ground with each step. I was just walking, my mind a million miles away, thinking about nothing in particular, when the world just stopped. It wasn't a gradual thing. 1 second it was the normal swamp sounds. The next, there was this sound that was so loud, so violent, it was like a gunshot. But it wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of wood being torn apart. Not a crack, not a snap. A tear, a long, loud, ripping sound like someone was taking a crowbar to a sheet of plywood. My heart just jumped into my throat. I froze right there on the trail, my hand tightening on the rifle stock. I looked up, my eyes scanning the pine trees ahead of me, and that's when I saw it. About 30, maybe 40 yards away, clinging to the trunk of a big pine tree, was this thing. My brain didn't want to process it at first. It was like looking at a picture that's been cut wrong and pasted together. It was all wrong. The tree was a pine tree. I know pine trees. This thing on it was not a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. It was big. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing looked to be about my height, but it was all solid, not fat, just dense like a power lifter. It was covered in this matted, shaggy fur, a color somewhere between dirty brown and storm cloud gray. It was clinging to the trunk of that pine tree, and its arms, God, its arms were thick, way thicker than a man's, and they were wrapped around that trunk like two pythons, and it had a tail, a thick, muscular tail, maybe 3 feet long, just hanging down. It was twitching, not a slow swish, but a fast, agitated flick, like a cat's tail when it's zeroed in on a bird. But the worst part was the sound. The ripping sound was it. It had these claws, long, dark, curved things. It had one hand dug into the bark, and with the other it was just peeling a strip of bark off the tree. It wasn't eating it. It wasn't looking for bugs. It was just tearing it off like it was bored or angry. The bark was falling to the ground in big, ragged pieces. I just stood there, paralyzed. My feet felt like they were nailed to the ground. I could feel the cold air in my lungs, but I couldn't seem to breathe out. My mind was screaming a dozen different things at once. Bear? No. Man in a fursuit? Don't be stupid. What is that? What is that? Then it saw me. Its head turned. It wasn't a slow turn. It was a sharp, deliberate movement. Its face, it didn't have a snout like a bear. It was flatter. The eyes were dark, deep set, and they locked right onto me. There was an intelligence there, not a human intelligence, but a sharp, aware, predatory kind of smart. It knew I was there, it knew I was looking at it, and it stopped tearing the bark. For a second, maybe two, we just looked at each other. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. I could feel every single hair on my arms standing up. A cold sweat broke out on my back, instantly making my shirt feel icy. Then it moved. It didn't jump. It didn't scramble. It started coming down the tree. It moved down that trunk head first like a squirrel, but so much bigger, so much heavier. Its claws dug into the wood, making a thunk, thunk, thunk sound as it descended. It was fast. Horrifyingly fast, and it was coming straight toward me. That's when the fear broke through the paralysis. It wasn't just fear, it was a pure animal terror, a chemical reaction in my body that screamed one word: run. I turned. I didn't think. I just spun on my heel and I ran. I ran like I've never run in my life, before or since. I abandoned my rifle. I just dropped it. It was a weight, and all that mattered was getting away. I crashed through the undergrowth, not caring about the briars tearing at my jeans and jacket. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The sound of it was enough. I could hear it behind me, a heavy, thudding impact as it hit the ground. Then the sound of its footsteps, a fast, pounding rhythm, much heavier than a man's, crashing through the leaves and branches. I was sobbing for air, my lungs burning with the cold. Every branch that whipped my face felt like a warning. I could smell it now, a musky, foul odor, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead, carried on the wind right behind me. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like an hour. It was probably less than a minute. My only thought was to get to the creek. I knew if I could get across the water, maybe it would throw it off. I hit the bank of the little creek that feeds into the swamp, and I didn't even break stride. I just leaped, my feet splashing into the icy, knee-deep water. I scrambled up the other side, my hands slipping in the mud, and I kept running, and then, just like that, the sound stopped. The pounding footsteps, the crashing in the brush. It all just stopped. I didn't stop running. I ran for another 100 yards before my body gave out. I collapsed behind a big fallen log, pressing myself against the damp, rotten wood. I was trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. I listened, straining to hear over the roar of my own heartbeat. Nothing, just the normal sounds of the swamp, the drip of water, a bird calling, the wind in the pines. I stayed there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just curled up behind that log, shaking. The cold started to seep in, and the reality of what just happened began to settle on me, heavy and sickening. I had to get out of there. I had to get home. I got up, my legs feeling like rubber. I moved slowly, quietly, terrified that any sound would bring it back. I didn't go back the way I came. I took the long way around, sticking to the open hardwoods, my eyes constantly scanning the trees, every shadow making me jump. It was fully dark by the time I stumbled out of the woods and onto the dirt road that led to my cousin's house. The lights from the windows looked like heaven. I burst through the back door, probably looking like a wild man. Muddy, wet, pale, and shaking. My cousin and his wife were in the kitchen. They took one look at me and knew something was terribly wrong. I tried to talk, but my words came out in a jumbled, gasping mess. I finally managed to get it out. I told them what I saw, the thing in the tree, the claws, the tail, the way it came after me. They were quiet for a minute. My cousin just looked at me, his face serious. He believed me. He's a hunter, he knows the woods, and he knew I wasn't making it up. He said, "We need to go back, now, before it gets any later." So we did. He grabbed his big flashlight and his deer rifle. His wife called my uncle, and he came over too. The three of us, armed and with a powerful light, went back into the swamp. I was terrified. Every step felt like walking into a nightmare. But having them with me, having a heavy caliber rifle in the group, made it possible. We went straight to the spot. It wasn't hard to find. Even in the beam of the flashlight, we could see the scar on the pine tree, a long raw gash where the bark had been torn away. It was shredded. Claw marks, deep and parallel, were gouged into the wood beneath. It wasn't a bear. Bears scratch trees, but they don't peel sheets of bark off like that. Then we looked at the ground. The pine needles were all scuffed up, and there, in a patch of soft mud near the base of the tree, were the tracks. They were like nothing I'd ever seen. They were big, maybe a foot long, and they had 3 toes, 3 long, distinct toes, with deep, puncturing claw marks at the tip of each one. The heel was broad, and the print was sunk deep into the mud, showing an immense weight. We just stood there, staring at them. No one said anything. The evidence was right there, undeniable. My uncle, a man of few words who'd spent his whole life in these woods, just shook his head slowly. He'd never seen anything like it either. The next morning, New Year's Day, we went back with my cousin's 2 coonhounds, good tracking dogs. We took them to the tracks. They sniffed at them, their noses working, and then they took off, baying, following a scent trail. We followed them, a spark of hope in our chests. Maybe we could find where it went. Maybe we could get some kind of answer. The dogs led us on a trail, a straight line through the swamp for about a quarter mile, and then, at the edge of a deep, stagnant-looking pond, they stopped. They just lost it. They circled around, whining, confused. The scent just ended. It was like whatever made that smell had walked into the water and never come out, or maybe climbed straight up a tree and kept going through the canopy. The dogs had nothing. That was it. That was all the proof we were ever going to get. A torn-up tree, some bizarre tracks, and a scent that vanished into thin air. In the weeks that followed, I talked to some of the old-timers around the county. I didn't even have to describe it in detail. I'd just say, I saw something out in Mill Swamp, and they'd get this look in their eyes, a knowing, wary look. I heard stories from the 50s, from the 60s, a logger who quit after something threw rocks at his shack, a couple of hunters in the early 70s who heard screams they swore weren't any animal they knew, a woman who found huge 3-toed prints around her trash cans one winter. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. This thing, whatever it is, has been out there for years. It's a part of this place, a secret the swamp has kept. I never went back into the deep parts of Mill Swamp after that. I still get the chills thinking about it, not just from the sight of it, clinging to that tree like some demon from a nightmare, but from the way it looked at me, the way it knew I was there, and the way it decided, in that single heart-stopping moment, to come down, to come for me. I left a part of myself out there in those woods that day, a part that's still running, still terrified, still listening for the sound of tearing bark. Story 14. I'm a farmer. We've got a small spread in southeastern Oklahoma, mostly cattle, but we kept a pen of goats for ourselves. It was a good life, a simple one. Me and my wife, the dogs, the land. That all changed in May. It didn't start with a bang. It started with a sound in the dead of night. It was the 3rd of May, a Thursday, I think. The air was thick and warm, the kind of night where you sleep with the windows open just to catch a breeze. We were dead asleep when the world outside exploded. It wasn't just the goats bleating. That was normal if a coyote was sniffing around. This was different. It was pure, shrieking terror. And the dogs, our 2 blue heelers who'd faced down a bull without blinking, they were going insane. Not the usual, hey, something's out there bark. This was a high-pitched, frantic, screaming bark, the kind that claws its way right up your spine. My heart was already hammering against my ribs before my feet even hit the cool wood floor. My wife sat bolt upright beside me, her hand gripping my arm. "What is that?" she whispered. But I didn't have an answer. I never kept a loaded gun in the house, but I had a rifle and a box of shells in the closet. My hands were shaking so bad, I fumbled the first 2 cartridges, trying to load the magazine. The sounds outside hadn't let up. If anything, they got worse. It sounded like the whole pen was going to tear itself apart. I finally got the rifle loaded and grabbed the big maglite from the kitchen counter. I remember the cold, heavy feel of the flashlight in one hand and the worn wood of the rifle stock in the other. I paused at the back door, my wife right behind me. "Be careful," she said, her voice tight. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the night. The porch light was on, but it only pushed the darkness back about 20 feet. Beyond that, it was a solid wall of black. I clicked on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the night, swinging wildly as I jogged toward the goat pen. The dogs were going nuts, but they weren't running toward the pen. They were staying right near the porch, barking toward the tree line, their tails tucked between their legs. That was the first real chill that went through me. Those dogs wouldn't back down from anything. I got to the goat pen, and my stomach just dropped. The gate, a solid thing made of welded pipe and heavy gauge wire, was bent inward. It wasn't just pushed open. The top hinge was ripped clean out of the post, and the metal was bowed like something massive had just leaned into it. The goats were huddled in the farthest corner, a trembling, bleating mass of fur and fear. I swung the flashlight beam around the inside of the pen. One was missing. Daisy, a little Nubian with floppy ears. The beam of my light swept the ground outside the pen. The ground was still soft from a rain shower 2 days before, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. I'm a big man, size 13 boots, and these prints made mine look like a child's. I knelt down, my knees sinking into the cold mud. I held the light close. They were long, really long. I didn't have a tape measure, but I laid my boot next to one. My boot was easily 4 inches shorter, so 17, 18 inches, and they had toes. Clear individual toe impressions, 5 of them, pressed deep into the mud. They weren't a bear's. I've seen bear tracks. These were different. The shape was all wrong, more like a giant human foot, but longer and wider at the front. I stood up, my blood running cold. I raised the rifle and scanned the tree line with the flashlight. Nothing. Just the endless, watchful trees. The dogs had finally quieted down to low, uneasy whines. I spent the next hour walking the perimeter of the house, the beam of my light feeling small and useless against the sheer size of the dark. I didn't see anything else. I finally went back inside, my clothes damp with sweat and night dew. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale. I told her about the gate and the tracks. We didn't say much else. What was there to say? We just sat there listening until the sun started to come up. As soon as it was light enough to see, we went back out. We found Daisy about 100 yards from the pen, down near the creek that runs through the back of our property. She wasn't just dead. It was a mess. Her body was torn open, and her ribs were bent outward, like something had just reached in and pulled her apart. Her legs were broken, snapped the wrong way. There were no bite marks you'd expect from a coyote or a bobcat. No signs of a struggle. It was like she'd been killed with one massive, brutal force and then just partially eaten. The feeling down by that creek was wrong. The air was still and heavy, and there was a smell, a sour, musky odor, like wet dog and old rotten meat, that clung to the back of your throat. We buried her there by the creek. I remember the silence between us as we shoveled dirt onto her. It wasn't the silence of grief, not just that. It was the silence of fear. We knew, both of us, that whatever did this wasn't normal. The next 2 weeks were a slow descent into a kind of madness. We started sleeping in shifts. The noises started. Not every night, but often enough to keep us on a razor's edge. We'd hear heavy footsteps circling the house, a slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump in the dirt. One night I heard 2 sets of them, one heavier than the other, moving together around the pasture. I was at the window, peering through a crack in the blinds, my rifle propped on the sill. I never saw what was making them. The flashlight would just find empty darkness. On the 8th of May, I saw it. Or at least I saw a part of it. It was just after dusk. I was topping off the feed barrels near the barn. I had my back turned to the tree line, and I got that feeling, you know. The feeling you're being watched so hard, the hair on your neck stands up. I turned around slowly, and there, maybe 60 yards away, just at the edge where the pasture met the woods, was a figure. It was tall, way too tall to be a man, and it was just standing there, upright. It was dark, covered in what looked like long blackish hair. It was just standing, perfectly still, watching me. I froze. I couldn't even breathe. I was too far from the house to run, too scared to move. We just stared at each other for what felt like a full minute. Then it took a step sideways and it was gone. It didn't run. It just melted back into the shadows of the trees. I stood there for another 5 minutes, my legs like jelly. When I finally made it back to the house, I was drenched in a cold sweat. The dogs, who were inside with my wife, hadn't made a sound. They were just lying on the floor, whining softly. Things kept happening. Feed barrels, the heavy plastic ones, were knocked over. A section of our perimeter fence was pushed down, the posts leaning at an angle, and that smell, that god-awful sour musk, would linger for hours after these things happened. A ghost left behind to remind us. The 18th of May was the night everything came to a head. We'd had enough. The fear had been building and building, a pressure cooker ready to blow. We decided we weren't going to sleep. We were going to sit up all night in the dark living room with the curtains open and just watch. We had the rifle, a shotgun, and both our powerful flashlights. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Every creak of the old house made us jump. It was around 2 in the morning. The moon was bright, casting long, deep shadows across the pasture. My wife was the one who saw it first. Her hand clamped down on my knee so hard it hurt. She just pointed. Out past the goat pen near the same spot I'd seen it before. Something was moving. It was walking upright along the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand slick with sweat, and clicked it on. The beam caught it full on. I swear my heart just stopped. It was massive. It had to be 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were huge, rounded and powerful, and its arms, they were so long. They hung down past its knees, swinging slightly as it walked. It was covered in dark, matted hair, but its face was darker, almost black, and in the center of that face, when the light hit its eyes, they reflected back at me. Not like a dog's or a cat's. This was a deep, glowing red, like 2 hot coals burning in the dark. It stopped walking and turned to face the house. It knew we were there. It knew we were watching. It didn't run. It didn't hide. It just stood there, looking right at us. I could feel its gaze, a physical weight. My wife made a small choke sound next to me. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't a roar, not really. It was lower, deeper, a guttural, rumbling bellow that seemed to vibrate right through the walls of the house and into my bones. The windows shook. The dogs, who were hiding under the table, let out a single terrified yelp and then went completely silent. That sound, it was a challenge. It was a promise. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my entire life. I don't even remember deciding to do it. I just raised the rifle, pointed it high into the air above the thing's head, and pulled the trigger. The bang was deafening in the quiet night. The flash lit up the yard for a split second. The creature didn't even flinch. It didn't startle. It didn't run. It just looked at us for another few seconds. Then it turned its head away like it was bored, and it started walking. Not fast, not slow, just a steady, deliberate walk, back toward the trees. It didn't look back. It just disappeared into the darkness like it had all the time in the world, and we were nothing, absolutely nothing. We sat there in the dark for the rest of the night, not saying a word, just holding on to each other, shaking. The sun came up and the world looked normal again, but we knew it wasn't. It would never be normal again. There was one last thing about a week and a half later, on the 29th. We were in the barn and something hit the outside wall. It wasn't a knock, it was a single massive thump that shook the whole structure, making dust and hay rain down from the rafters. We ran outside, but there was nothing there, just that same faint sour smell on the air. And then it stopped, just like that. The footprints we'd cast in plaster, the bent gate, the broken fence, they were all the evidence we had. The creature never came back. We've reinforced everything since then. Stronger pens, motion sensor lights everywhere, more cameras than I can count. We're still here. We didn't run, but we live differently now. We're always listening, always watching. I'll be out checking fences, and I'll get that feeling. The hair on my neck will stand up and I'll freeze, scanning the tree line, my heart in my throat. I never see anything, but I know it's out there. I saw it. I heard it. And sometimes, in the dead of night when the wind is just right, I think I can still smell it. Story 15. Okay, I'm just gonna write this all out. I've never told anyone the whole thing. Not like this, not with all the details. It feels stupid even typing it, but I found this forum and I see I'm not the only one. So here goes. This happened back in November of 2016. I was deer hunting by myself in a national forest in western Arkansas. I'd been going to this general area for a few years, knew it pretty well, or at least I thought I did. I liked the solitude. I'd set up a small camp off an old logging road that was mostly grown over, a nice flat clearing, surrounded by pines and oaks. It was my second day out. I hadn't seen much, just some squirrels and birds, nothing worth taking a shot at. That evening, I got back to camp right around dusk. I was tired, my feet were sore from walking all day, and the temperature was starting to drop. First thing I did was light my propane lantern and set it on the stump I used as a table. Then I got a small fire going, just enough to boil some water for my dehydrated meal and to take the chill off. My rifle, a bolt-action 30-06, was unloaded. I always make a point of clearing it before I get back to camp. I leaned it against the trunk of a big pine tree, right at the edge of the firelight. It was a habit. It was just part of the camp, like the tent or the firewood. As the last of the light faded, the forest got quiet. Not just quiet, but dead quiet. You know how it usually is. You hear the last few birds settling in, maybe some crickets starting up, the rustle of the wind. This was different. It was like everything just shut off. It was unnerving, but I wrote it off. Maybe a predator was moving through, an owl or a coyote, and everything was hiding. I tried to ignore it and focused on eating my lukewarm pasta. Then I heard the knocks. It was around 7:15. I remember because I'd just checked my watch, thinking about how long until I could reasonably crawl into my sleeping bag. The sound came from up the slope behind my camp. It was heavy. Thump. A solid wooden impact. Like someone hitting a tree with a big sledgehammer. It wasn't a branch falling. It was too deliberate, too clean. I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth. A few seconds later, another knock answered from further away, but this one was deeper, heavier. It didn't just sound bigger, it felt bigger. It was a sound you felt in your chest. My heart started thumping in time with it. I sat there for a minute just listening, but nothing else happened. The silence rushed back in, even heavier than before. I'm not a coward. I've spent a lot of nights in the woods. I stood up, my food forgotten, and grabbed my big Maglite flashlight. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded thin and stupid in the huge quiet. I swept the beam across the trees on the slope. The light just hit trunks and shadows, the beam getting eaten up by the darkness about 20 yards out. Nothing moved. No eyes reflected back. I stood there for a couple minutes, feeling the cold air on my face, listening so hard my ears started to ring. Nothing. I went back to the fire, but I couldn't sit still. I kept the flashlight in my lap. The knocks had freaked me out. I'll admit it. It's one thing to hear a noise you can explain. This wasn't explainable. It felt like a message or a warning. I tried to tell myself it was a woodpecker, a really big one, but I knew that was a lie. Nothing pecks a tree that hard once and then stops. Time dragged. By 9 o'clock I was just sitting on my camp stool, staring into the dying embers of my fire, jumping at every little rustle. That's when the smell hit me. It came on the breeze, a strong, musky odor. It was thick, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something rotten and earthy, like a bog or a locker room that hadn't been cleaned in a year. It was so potent it made my eyes water a little. I'd never smelled anything like it in the woods. I'd smelled skunk, I'd smelled dead things. This was different. This was alive. Then I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Through the dry leaves on the forest floor, they were heavy too. Each step had a weight to it that made the sound solid. This wasn't a deer. Deer are light and quick. This wasn't a bear. I've heard bears, they can be quiet when they want to, and when they're not, it's more of a shuffling. This was a straight-up bipedal walk, one foot after the other. Crunch, crunch. My throat went dry. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Who's out there?" The footsteps stopped. The smell got stronger, like whatever it was had paused and was just standing there. The silence was absolute again, and it was worse than the footsteps. I was holding my breath, my whole body tense, waiting for an answer. None came. After maybe 10 seconds, the footsteps started again, but they were closer now, a lot closer. They were just outside the ring of light from my lantern. I could hear the leaves crushing under the weight, could almost feel the vibration. I fumbled with the flashlight, my hands shaking, and clicked it on, sweeping the beam in the direction of the sound. The second the light hit the trees, something moved. It was fast. Just a shifting of shadows, but it was big. Too big. It ducked behind a thick oak trunk. I kept the light on the tree, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was about to call out again when I heard a skittering sound in the leaves to my left. I swung the light over just in time to see a rock, about the size of a baseball, roll to a stop right at the edge of the firelight. It hadn't fallen, it had been thrown. Not at me, but into the clearing. A perfect underhand toss. That was it. That was the moment the fear went from nervousness to pure, cold terror. This wasn't some lost hiker. This was something messing with me. I didn't think. I acted. I kicked dirt over my fire, smothering the embers in a few frantic, panicked movements. I grabbed the lantern, turned it off, and basically dove into my tent. I yanked the zipper closed and sat there in the pitch black, my back against the tent wall, listening. The smell was everywhere now, seeping through the nylon of the tent. It was so strong I could taste it in the back of my throat. A foul, metallic taste. I could hear it breathing, not panting, just a slow, steady rhythm. And then the footsteps started circling the tent. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They moved from one side, past the front flap, around to the other side. It was taking its time. I was curled into a ball, my knees up to my chest. I had my hunting knife out of its sheath, gripping the handle so tight my knuckles ached. It was a 6-inch blade. It felt like a toothpick. Then, on the side of the tent right next to my head, the fabric bulged inward slightly. Something brushed against it. Not a hard hit, just a slow, dragging pressure, like a hand with thick, coarse hair was being dragged down the wall. I flinched so hard, I almost screamed. I clamped my hand over my own mouth to keep the sound in. I could feel the cold sweat soaking through my shirt. The footsteps completed their circle and stopped right behind me again. I felt the air change, a slight pressure, and then I heard it exhale. It wasn't just a sound, it was a low, resonant huff that vibrated through the tent fabric and into my spine. I could feel it in my teeth. It was a sound of pure power, a sound that said, "I am here and you are nothing." For the next 20 minutes it put on a show. It was toying with me. I heard a loud crack, as a branch, a thick one, was snapped in two, not broken by stepping on it, but snapped with force. Then a sound I'll never forget, a wet, solid thwack, like a giant palm slapping the bark of a tree. It was so hard the tree trunk vibrated. A minute later, there was a sharp, splintering crunch as a young sapling was broken off near its base. I heard it being dragged a few feet and then dropped. Then, the worst sound, a heavy, solid thud that shook the ground. It landed near my ATV, which was parked about 15 feet from the tent. It sounded like someone had dropped a full-grown elk from a height. The impact was physical. I felt it through the floor of the tent. I just sat there, rigid. I wasn't breathing right. I was taking these tiny, shallow sips of air, afraid that if I breathed too loud, it would hear me. My muscles were locked up with tension. I was freezing cold and sweating at the same time. I kept thinking about my rifle, leaning against that tree, unloaded and useless. I'd never felt so stupid or so vulnerable in my entire life. Through the tent wall, I saw a shadow move past the spot where my lantern had been. The moon was out, providing a little ambient light. This shadow was massive. It blotted out the faint glow completely for a second as it passed. It was upright, and it was huge. My brain tried to make it a bear, but bears don't walk that straight, and they aren't that tall. The proportions were all wrong. Then came the growl. It started low, a rumble so deep it was almost a vibration more than a sound. It built, rolling through the clearing, and it wasn't a challenge. It was a promise. It was a sound of pure predatory menace. It felt ancient. It rose in pitch just a little and then cut off. Silence. Two more heavy footfalls. Crunch, crunch. They were right outside. Then, nothing. The silence stretched on. The smell began to fade slowly. The pressure in the air lifted. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe two. The adrenaline crash was brutal. I was shaking uncontrollably. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, a sliver of grey light was showing through the tent fabric. It was first light. I didn't move for a long time. I just listened. The forest sounds were back. Birds were chirping. It was the most beautiful, relieving sound I'd ever heard. My body felt like it had been beaten with a bat. Every muscle was sore from being clenched all night. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped the tent flap just a few inches and peered out. The clearing was a mess. The leaf litter was all disturbed. There were partial impressions everywhere, not clear footprints, just places where something heavy had stood and pressed down. Twigs were broken all around the perimeter. A patch of brush near where I'd heard the sapling break was completely trampled flat. My eyes went to the pine tree where I'd left my rifle. It was on the ground. I crawled out of the tent, my legs wobbly. I walked over to it, my heart sinking. It wasn't just knocked over, it was destroyed. The wooden stock was splintered like it had been smashed against the tree. The barrel, which is solid steel, was bent, not just a little dent. It was bent in a smooth, almost graceful arc. You can't bend a rifle barrel like that by hand. You'd need a hydraulic press. The scope was twisted on its mounts. The lenses cracked. The leather sling was torn in two, the ends frayed. I just stared at it. I reached down and touched the cold, bent steel. It was real. This wasn't a dream. The sheer, deliberate violence of it was what got me. It hadn't just been stolen or thrown. It had been systematically broken, rendered utterly useless. It was a message, a very clear, very final one. I can do this to your weapon. Imagine what I can do to you. Then I saw the footprints. A few feet away in a patch of soft, damp soil were two perfect impressions. They were huge. I later measured one with a tape from my kit, over 17 inches long. They were deep, pressed into the ground with immense weight. The shape was human-like, but wider, much wider, with a splayed toe area. They weren't bear tracks. I know what bear tracks look like. The musky smell was still there, faint but unmistakable, hanging in the cold morning air. I didn't bother with coffee. I didn't bother packing anything neatly. I threw my tent, my sleeping bag, everything into the cargo box on my ATV in a tangled heap. I left my broken rifle on the ground. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. I just wanted to be gone. I started the ATV, the engine roaring to life, sounding obscenely loud. I didn't look back. I gunned it down that old logging road, bouncing over ruts, branches whipping at me. I didn't slow down until I hit the paved county road miles away. I never went back, not to that clearing, not to that part of the forest. I sold my ATV the next year. I haven't been hunting since. The terror of that night wasn't just the sounds or the smell or the shadow. It was the intelligence behind it. It knew I was there. It knew what a rifle was. It knew how to scare me. It made me feel like prey, but not like a wolf hunts a deer. More like a cat plays with a mouse. It was letting me know that I was in its world on its terms. And the final proof, the thing that keeps me up some nights even now, was my rifle, bent steel. A physical impossibility made real. I can't explain it. I don't try to anymore. I just know what happened, and I know I never ever want to be that close to it again. Story 16. Hey, so I've been lurking on this forum for a while, reading all these crazy stories, and I guess it's time I shared mine. This happened back on November 5th, 2010, and even now, just thinking about it makes my skin crawl. I've never told anyone outside my family because, honestly, who would believe it? But since you all are into this kind of stuff, I'll lay it out. It was my wife's birthday, and I wanted to do something special for her. She's not really the outdoorsy type, but she's always humored my love for hiking, so I figured a family trip to Lake Cushman in Washington would be nice. We live in Castle Rock, so it wasn't too far of a drive, maybe an hour or so. I picked Big Creek Trail near Hoodport because it's supposed to be an easier loop, good for the kids and not too strenuous for my wife. My son was 8 at the time, my daughter 6. Both full of energy and excitement for what they called a forest adventure. We left home around 9 in the morning, the sky already looking grim and grey, like it might drizzle any second. The drive was quiet, the kids chattering in the back seat about what animals they might see, while my wife and I talked about mundane stuff. Work, bills, you know, the usual. But as we got closer to the trailhead, I started feeling a bit off, like a low hum of anxiety in my chest. I brushed it off as just being tired or something. We pulled into the parking area around 10, and the place was empty except for one other car that looked like it had been there a while, covered in pine needles. We got out, stretched our legs, and I helped the kids with their little backpacks while my wife double-checked the map on her phone. The air was damp and cool, with that earthy smell of wet leaves and pine, but something felt different right away. As we started down the trail, the first thing that hit me was the silence. I mean, dead quiet. I've been hiking these woods since I was a kid, and there's always noise. Birds chirping, squirrels rustling, the wind whispering through the trees. But that day, nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the whole forest. My wife noticed it too. She nudged me and said, "It's so still in here, isn't it? Creepy." I nodded, trying to play it cool for the kids, but inside I was already on edge. The path was muddy from recent rain, and our boots squelched with every step, which only made the silence feel heavier. The trees were thick, mostly Douglas firs and cedars, their branches blocking out a lot of the grey light, so it felt like we were walking in a dim green tunnel. My son kept asking why there were no birds, and I just shrugged, saying maybe they were hiding from the weather. But honestly, I had no good answer. We'd been walking for about an hour, just following the trail as it wound along Big Creek. The kids were starting to get bored, complaining about being tired, and my wife was trying to keep them entertained by pointing out mushrooms and interesting rocks. Then, around 11:30, I heard it. At first, it sounded like a distant logging truck, a low, rumbling noise that vibrated through the ground, like when you feel a big rig passing on a highway. I stopped walking, holding up a hand to quiet everyone. "You hear that?" I whispered. My wife nodded, her eyes wide. The sound grew, but then it changed. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It was alive. A deep, sorrowful howl or groan echoed through the trees, so loud it felt like it was right on top of us. It lasted what felt like forever, probably 8 to 10 seconds, and it had this raw, guttural quality that made the hair on my arm stand up. My stomach dropped, like when you're on a roller coaster and it plunges down, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. My daughter started crying immediately, burying her face in my wife's leg, and my son grabbed my hand, his fingers trembling. "Dad, what was that?" he asked, his voice shaky. I didn't know what to say. I've heard coyotes, bears, even elk, but this was nothing like any of that. It was deeper, more mournful, and it carried this weight that made the air feel thick and heavy. We all just stood there, frozen for a minute, listening as the sound faded away, leaving that eerie silence again. My wife's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We should turn back," she said softly. But I shook my head. Stupid, I know, but I didn't want to let some weird noise ruin the day. "It's probably just an animal," I said, trying to sound confident. But inside, I was freaking out. The kids were scared, so I promised them we'd keep going and maybe see something cool up ahead. We pressed on, walking faster now, and the trail started to climb a bit towards Skinwood Creek Bridge. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something moving in the trees. The forest felt watchful, like we were being followed, but I didn't see anything, just shadows and more silence. When we reached the bridge, that's when the smell hit us. It was sudden, like walking into a wall of stench, pungent, chemical and rotten, like a skunk had sprayed mixed with ammonia or bleach, but way stronger. It burned my nostrils and made my eyes water instantly. My daughter started sobbing again, covering her nose with her hands, and my son gagged, doubling over. My wife coughed, her eyes red and tearing up. "What is that?" she gasped. "I've smelled some bad things in the woods, dead animals mold, but this was on another level. It was so intense, it felt like it was coating the back of my throat, and I had to fight the urge to vomit." We hurried across the bridge, hoping to get away from it, but the smell clung to the air, making it hard to breathe. I remember looking around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing obvious. No carcass, no trash, just the creek bubbling below and the dense trees on either side. After a few minutes, the smell faded a bit, and we caught our breath. My daughter was still crying, begging to go home, and my wife was giving me this look like, "I told you so." But we were already halfway through the loop, so I figured we might as well finish it. The trail curved around to the west side, and as we started down the slope, the smell came back, even stronger than before. It was like it was following us, or maybe we were walking into its territory. This time, it was so bad that my son actually threw up a little on the side of the path. I felt terrible for pushing them, but I just wanted to get through it and back to the truck. The whole area felt wrong. The trees were thicker, the light dimmer, and that silence was still there, broken only by our footsteps and the occasional sniffle from the kids. We kept moving, not talking much, just focused on getting out of there. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Was it a bear? A big cat? But the sound didn't match, and the smell was too chemical, too unnatural. I've read stories online about weird stuff in the woods, but I never thought I'd experience it firsthand. As we walked, I started noticing little things. Broken branches at odd heights, like something big had pushed through, and the ground was disturbed in places, but no tracks that I could see. The fear was a constant buzz in my head, and I kept my kids close, my arm around my daughter's shoulders, my hand on my son's back. Finally, we reached the end of the loop and started heading back toward the parking area. The smell had faded again, and the silence was lifting a little. I heard a distant bird call, which should have been comforting, but it just made me more uneasy, like the forest was waking up after whatever had happened. That's when I saw the mushrooms. They were scattered along the path in a straight line, like someone had deliberately placed them there. But these weren't just knocked over. They were pulled completely out of the ground, roots and all, with the tops bitten off clean. I stopped to look at one, and it was weird. The stem was torn, not cut, and the dirt was still clinging to the roots. I've seen deer eat mushrooms, but they usually leave a neat bite, not rip them out like this. It was bizarre, and it sent another chill down my spine. Without thinking, I picked one up and stuffed it in my pocket, like some kind of evidence, though I had no idea what I'd do with it. We picked up the pace, almost jogging the last bit to the truck. The kids were quiet now, just eager to get out, and my wife kept glancing back, her face tight with fear. When we finally reached the parking lot, the relief was overwhelming. The other car was gone, and it was just us, the gray sky, and the quiet hum of the forest behind us. We piled into the truck, and I locked the doors out of habit, even though we were in the middle of nowhere. The drive home was hushed. No one spoke much, just stared out the windows. My wife held my daughter, who had fallen asleep, and my son leaned against me, his breathing slowly calming down. Back home, we tried to act normal, but that night, none of us slept well. I kept waking up, hearing that howl in my dreams, smelling that foul stench. I still have that mushroom in a jar in my garage, dried out and weird-looking, a reminder of that day. We've never gone back to that trail, and my wife still gets nervous when I suggest a hike. Whatever it was, it felt intelligent, like it knew we were there, and it wanted us to know it was there too. To this day, I have no explanation, and that's what scares me the most, not knowing what was out there in those woods, watching us, following us, and why it left us with nothing but questions and a deep, lingering fear that still haunts me whenever I step into the forest. Story 17. The road was 16, which cuts through some pretty dense woods out there. It's not a highway or anything, just a two-lane road that winds through patches of forest and open fields. And at night, it gets real dark because there aren't many streetlights. That particular night, a thick fog had rolled in, the kind that clings to everything and makes the world feel smaller. I remember the air was cool and damp, and I had the windows cracked just a bit to keep the windshield from fogging up too much. My 9-year-old daughter was in the front seat with me, and my other daughter, who was about 6 at the time, was curled up in the back, already dozing off. We'd spent the day at my sister's place, and I was tired, just wanting to get home and crash. I was driving west, heading back toward our house, and the car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the soft rustle of the trees outside. My older daughter was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't full of static, but the fog seemed to mess with the signal, so we gave up and just listened to the silence. I remember glancing at the clock on the dashboard. It was past 9 o'clock, and the darkness felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing in on the car. The headlights cut through the fog in 2 bright beams, but they didn't reach far, just enough to light up the road ahead and the edges where the trees crowded in. I've driven that road dozens of times, so I knew it well. But that night, everything felt different. The woods on either side were pitch black, and every now and then, I'd see the glow of animal eyes reflecting back at me, raccoons or deer, probably, just watching from the shadows. But then, about halfway between Penny Farms and Grivo Springs, I saw something that made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. Up ahead, near the tree line on the right side of the road, there was a dark shape that didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. It was tall and skinny, just standing there, almost blending into the trees, but it was moving in a way that made my stomach drop. I slowed down without even thinking, my foot easing off the gas pedal. My daughter noticed right away because the car got quieter and she looked over at me. "What's wrong, Dad?" she asked, her voice a little nervous. I didn't answer at first. I was too focused on that shape. It was maybe 50 yards ahead, and as I got closer, it stepped out onto the road. I swear my heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. This thing was huge, like way taller than a man, but it wasn't human. It was covered in this matted brown hair that looked dirty and tangled, and it was walking upright on two legs, moving quickly across the road like it was in a hurry, but didn't make a sound. The headlights from my car hit it full on, and at the same time, another car came from the opposite direction, its lights adding to the glare. For a split second, everything was illuminated, and I got a clear look at it. The thing had long arms that swung as it walked, and its legs were kind of bent, like it was built for moving through rough terrain. It didn't turn to look at us or anything. It just kept going, crossing from one side of the road to the other in a few strides. There was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling, nothing. It was like watching a ghost, but solid and real, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. My daughter gasped and pointed, her voice shaking as she said, "What is that?" I could hear the fear in her words, and it made my own panic worse. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't walk like that, all upright and fast. It wasn't a person in a costume or anything, because no one would be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that. This was something else, something that shouldn't exist, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt this primal fear, the kind that makes your skin crawl and your breath catch in your throat. I had to say something to calm her down, so I stammered out, "It's just a cow, honey." Even as I said it, I knew how stupid it sounded. My voice was shaky, and I could barely get the words out. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Cows don't walk on two legs, Dad." She was right, of course, and I didn't have an answer for that. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles turned white. The thing had disappeared into the trees on the other side of the road, and the fog swallowed it up like it was never there. For a few seconds, we both just sat there in silence. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, making my legs feel weak even though I was sitting down. My daughter was staring out the window, her face pale, and I knew she was as scared as I was. I glanced in the rearview mirror to check on my younger daughter. She was still asleep, thank God, so at least she didn't see any of it. But the quiet in the car was heavy now, filled with this unspoken terror. I kept expecting to see something else, for the thing to come back or for there to be more of them, but the road ahead was empty. Just the fog and the dark trees looming on either side. I pushed the gas pedal down a little harder, wanting to put distance between us and that spot. The car accelerated, and the sound of the engine seemed louder than before, like it was protesting. My mind was stuck on what I'd seen, the way it moved, so fluid and purposeful, like it belonged out there in a way we didn't. I've spent time in the woods my whole life, hunting and fishing, and I've seen plenty of wildlife. But this was different. This felt ancient, like something from a time before people, and it left me with this deep, unsettling feeling that I'd glimpsed a part of the world that's supposed to stay hidden. The rest of the drive home was a blur. I kept my eyes glued to the road, scanning the edges for any movement, but nothing else happened. My daughter didn't say another word. She just sat there with her arms crossed, looking out the window like she was trying to see through the fog. I could tell she was thinking about it too, and I felt guilty for not being able to protect her from that fear. As a parent, you're supposed to have answers, to make things okay. But in that moment, I had nothing. All I could do was drive and hope we got home safe. When we finally pulled into our driveway, I felt this wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. I helped my daughters inside, my younger one still half asleep, and got them settled in bed. My older daughter gave me a hug before she went to her room, and she whispered, "Dad, that wasn't a cow, was it?" I just shook my head and said, "No, it wasn't." I didn't know what else to say. We never talked about it much after that night, not for years anyway. It became one of those things we both knew happened but didn't bring up, like a secret we were too scared to acknowledge. But the memory of that foggy night has stuck with me ever since. I can still picture it clearly. The way the headlights lit up that figure, the silence as it crossed the road, the chill that ran down my spine. Sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I'll catch a shadow out of the corner of my eye and my heart will skip a beat. I've never seen anything like it again, and part of me is grateful for that, but another part wonders what else is out there in those woods. It's been decades now, and I still can't explain what we saw. All I know is that it was real, and it's left me with this lingering sense that the world is a lot bigger and stranger than we think. Story 18. I climbed into my old pickup, a beat-up Ford that's seen better days, and tossed my tools on the passenger seat, a hammer, some staples, wire cutters, and a pair of heavy gloves. I'd grabbed my headlamp too, because it gets dark fast out here, and the moon was just a sliver that night. The drive to the back fence isn't far, maybe 10 minutes across the pasture, but every bump in the rough track jolted me, and the cold seeped through the cab's thin metal. I could see my breath fogging up the windshield, and I had to wipe it with my sleeve to see where I was going. The headlights cut through the dark, lighting up patches of grass and the shadowy tree line ahead. That forest's always felt alive, you know, like it's watching you, but I'd never thought much of it until then. When I got to the fence, I killed the engine and stepped out into the chill. The air was sharp, biting at my cheeks, and I could hear the usual night sounds, frogs croaking from a nearby pond, the distant rustle of cattle settling down. I flicked on my headlamp, and the beam swept over the sagging wire. It was a mess. One of the posts had leaned over, and the barbed wire was drooping low enough for a cow to step over. I set to work, my gloves making my fingers clumsy, but I've done this 100 times. I started by tightening the wire, using the hammer to drive staples back into the wood. The metal clinked and groaned as I pulled it taut, and the post creaked under the strain. For a while, everything felt normal, just me and the night, the kind of solitude I'm used to. But then slowly, the sounds started to fade. First, the frogs went quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a predator was nearby, like a coyote or something, but then the cattle stopped lowing. The silence that fell was heavy, unnatural. It was like someone had thrown a blanket over the world, muffling everything. I paused, hammer in hand, and listened. Nothing. Not a whisper of wind, not a rustle in the trees. My heart started to beat a little faster, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. I've been out here in the dark plenty, but this was different. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. I kept working, trying to shake off the feeling, but then I heard it, a heavy thud. Like something big was stepping through the underbrush. It wasn't a deer. Deer move lightly, almost gracefully. This was a solid, deliberate sound, like footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. They were getting closer, and each one sent a jolt through me. I swung my headlamp toward the tree line, but the beam only reached so far, leaving the forest swallowed in darkness. My mouth went dry, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cold. I gripped the hammer tighter, my knuckles white. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and shaky in the silence. No answer, just another thud, closer now. Then came this deep huff, like a horse snorting but deeper, more guttural. It echoed in the stillness and I froze. The air shifted, carrying a smell, musky, sour, like wet fur and something rotten. It hit me like a physical blow, making my stomach churn. I backed up toward the truck, my boots crunching on the frozen ground, but I couldn't take my eyes off the trees. That's when I saw it. Something moved in the shadows, and then it stepped into the edge of the light. My headlamp caught it, and I swear my heart stopped. It was massive, standing upright like a person, but a head and a half taller than me. I'm 5'8", so this thing had to be over 7 feet tall. Its shoulders were broad, almost hunched, and its arms hung long, swinging slightly as it moved. The body was covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked coarse and matted, and its face... God, I can still see it. It wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal either. The eyes reflected the light, glowing faintly, and the mouth was set in a grim line. It took a step forward, and the ground seemed to shake. I could hear its breathing, ragged and loud, and that smell intensified, filling the air around me. I stood there paralyzed for what felt like an eternity. Then it let out a roar, a deep, thunderous sound that vibrated through my chest. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. It was raw and angry, and it echoed through the trees. Before I could react, it lunged toward the fence I'd just fixed. Its hands, massive with thick fingers, grabbed the barbed wire and yanked. The post, which I'd just reinforced, snapped like a twig. Wood splintered with a sharp crack, and the wire coiled back, whipping through the air. I stumbled backward, dropping the hammer. It clattered on the ground, and I reached for it, but the creature was already coming for me. It charged, moving faster than anything that size should be able to. I felt a shove, like being hit by a truck, and I went flying, landing hard on my back. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and pain shot through my ribs. I gasped for air, scrambling to get up. But the creature was right there, looming over me. Its shadow blocked out the light from my headlamp, and I could feel its heat, its breath hot and rancid on my face. I kicked out, my boot connecting with something solid, but it didn't even flinch. Instead, it let out another huff, and I saw its eyes narrow. Somehow I managed to roll to the side and get to my feet. My legs were shaking, and I could taste blood in my mouth from biting my cheek. I didn't look back. I just ran for the truck. Every step felt like I was moving through mud, and I could hear its footsteps behind me, heavy and relentless. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands slippery with sweat, and yanked it open. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut just as something hit the side of the truck. The whole vehicle rocked, and I heard metal groaning. I fumbled for the keys, my hands trembling so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine coughed to life, and I hit the headlights, flooding the area with light. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It was circling the truck, its movements fluid but powerful. It was huge, with legs like tree trunks, and its feet left deep impressions in the ground. As it passed in front of the hood, it slammed a hand down, and the metal dented inward with a loud crunch. The sound was deafening, and I flinched, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. It kept circling, pounding on the truck, on the doors, the roof, the hood. Each blow shook the cab, and I could feel the vibrations through the seat. The windows rattled, and I thought they might shatter. I locked the doors, but it felt pointless. This thing was strong enough to tear the truck apart if it wanted to. The smell seeped in through the vents, that musky, sour stench making me gag. I could see its face in the rearview mirror, eyes locked on me. And I've never felt so small, so helpless. I was crying by then, tears mixing with the sweat on my face, and I kept whispering, "Please, just go away," over and over. It went on for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The creature took a step back, let out one final roar that made my ears ring, and then turned and lumbered toward the trees. I watched it disappear into the darkness, its shape blending with the shadows until I couldn't see it anymore. The silence returned, but now it felt even heavier, charged with fear. I sat there for a long time, too scared to move. My whole body was shaking, and I could feel bruises forming where I'd fallen. Eventually, I put the truck in gear and drove back to the house, my knuckles white on the wheel. I didn't look back, but I could still smell that stench lingering in the cab. When I got inside, I locked the doors and sat in the kitchen, staring at the wall until the sun started to come up. I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, I called my neighbor. He's a few miles down the road, and we've helped each other out over the years. I didn't tell him everything, just that something had spooked me and wrecked the fence. When we drove back out there, the scene was a mess. The post was splintered into pieces, the barbed wire coiled up like a snake, and there were footprints everywhere, big, deep impressions with toes splayed out, way larger than any bear or human track I've ever seen. And on the grill of my truck, we found coarse, dark hairs stuck in the metal. My neighbor just shook his head and said, "Lynn, what in the hell happened out here?" But I didn't have an answer. That was over 20 years ago, and I still think about it every day. I don't go out after dark anymore, not even for emergencies. I've added more lights around the property and keep a rifle close, but I know it wouldn't do much good. Whatever that thing was, it was powerful, aggressive, and real. I've heard stories about Sasquatch, but I never believed them until that night. Now I'm just left with the memory, the silence, the smell, the sheer terror, and no explanation that makes sense. It's like a part of me is still out there, frozen in that moment, and I don't think I'll ever fully shake it.